Story 1.
After catching my wife cheating with her boss, I carefully planned and delivered the ultimate revenge. The signs were prepared and positioned near the front entrance. Having spent the majority of the last couple of days perfecting them, now came the challenging part, ascending the stairs into the master bedroom. I swiftly stripped the bed, maneuvered the mattress off the queen-sized frame, and half-lifted, half-slid it downstairs through the hallway, out the front door, and onto the lawn adjacent to the street. Returning inside, I hurled the slats and bedclothes downstairs, following them outside and adding them to the pile beside the mattress. After another trip upstairs, I dismantled the side rails and swiftly transported them outside. Glancing at my watch, I noted it was 4:22. Time was of the essence. I needed to finish by 5. Reassembling the bed took until 4:35. Next up was the kitchen table. Light enough for me to handle alone, I angled it sideways through the door and placed it beside the bed in the yard. The last item was the 6x8 throw rug in the living room. After rolling it up, I joined it with the other items in the yard, erected the signs, and proudly observed the time. 4:55, just 10 minutes until my wife's return. Stepping into the middle of the street, I surveyed my handiwork. It was a sight to behold, almost bringing a tear to my eye. Our marriage bed, the kitchen table, and the throw rug, 3 places I knew had been used by my wife and her lover repeatedly over the past 6 months. The signs, perfectly placed and out of reach, completed the scene. I approached each piece of furniture and read aloud the large sign in front of it. "These items are yours for the taking, free. They are no longer wanted in this house. If you are able to stomach the stench of infidelity and broken vows, help yourself." The sign above the bed detailed my wife's infidelity, specifying her regular liaisons with her lover over the past 6 months. Above the kitchen table, another sign recounted their activities, typically just before she served me dinner. On the throw rug, a sign indicated their preference for that spot. Each sign was adorned with a 17x 24-inch photo of the adulterous couple in the act. Behind the table, a 5th sign revealed the identity of my wife's lover, Greg Allen, her boss at Mitchell, Price & Allen. Really married with 3 children, he was unaware of his wife's actions, but not for long. The time was 4:57, just in time. She would be home any minute. As I turned to assess the gathering crowd of neighbors and the increasing number of halted cars, some onlookers phoned friends or the police. I nonchalantly acknowledged the gathering and retreated into the house, closing the door behind me. Precisely at 5 p.m., my wife's car rounded the corner. Observing the commotion near our house, she slowed down, her gaze fixed on the spectacle unfolding on our lawn. I imagined her focusing on the furniture and signs, particularly the large photos of her and Greg Allen engaged in their illicit activities, their expressions captured in moments of lust and pleasure. Even with her car window between us, amidst the crowd of 40 or 50 onlookers, I still heard her desperate cry, "No! Oh God, no!" Finally, her gaze shifted from the signs to the front window of our house, where she spotted me standing. We locked eyes. She appeared devastated, her complexion drained, tears streamed down her cheeks. It seemed as if she was questioning me, mirroring my own bewilderment. I observed her for a moment before turning away, drawing the curtain shut behind me. Perhaps now is the time to recount how my wife Sherry and I ended up in this tragic situation. My name is Jack Meyer. I met Sherry during our junior year of college, introduced by a mutual friend. Instantly, I was captivated. Sherry wasn't conventionally beautiful, but she possessed an irresistible charm. Standing at 5'2" with striking blue eyes and shoulder-length blonde hair, she had a petite yet perfectly proportioned figure that enchanted me. From that moment, I was smitten, never doubting my ability to win her heart. Sherry and I began dating, quickly becoming inseparable. Within a month, we shared our first close moment, an experience unlike any other. I was consumed by my love for sure, unable to get enough of her. Though we were not virgins, our passion for each other was all-consuming. Every moment together was blissful, every touch electric. Our love deepened over the years. After graduating, we married and settled into our first home, a condo in Van. Sherry pursued a career in real estate, while I found work in electronic manufacturing. We built a life together that I believed to be perfect. For the next 13 years, we shared an idyllic existence, first in our condo and later in our dream home as our finances improved. We welcomed our children, Shelby, now 8, and Ryan, now 6, whom we adored beyond measure. Our family was our world. So, what went wrong? I wish I had the answers. I wish I had noticed the subtle signs indicating something was amiss, but I was oblivious, living in a bubble of love and trust. It took an unexpected event, our daughter Shelby falling ill at school, to uncover the truth. It was a Thursday when I received the call from the school nurse, just before noon, informing me of Shelby's illness. In the midst of a staff meeting, I asked the nurse to contact my wife. Despite attempts to reach her at her office and on her cell, she was unreachable, so the nurse called me. Recognizing the urgency of fetching my daughter, I apologized to my staff and hurried to Shelby's school to retrieve her. Upon reaching home, upon opening the garage, I was startled by an unfamiliar car parked in my spot beside my wife's. Instantly, a lump formed in my throat and my stomach churned. No, it couldn't be, I reassured myself. My wife, the woman I cherished above all else, couldn't possibly be having an affair. But why was there a strange car in the garage with the door closed? Something was amiss, and I needed answers. I couldn't expose my daughter to this uncertainty. I instructed Shelby to stay in the car for a moment, explaining that the exterminator was spraying for bugs and the fumes could make her feel worse. It was the first time I had ever lied to her. Shelby complained about being tired and wanting to go inside, but I reassured her that I would check first before coming to get her. Later, Shelby asked me what was going on, and I'd reassured her that everything was fine, attributing my discomfort to the odor in the house. I left Shelby with her grandmother, promising to return for her in a couple of hours. I didn't disclose what I had witnessed, simply asking my mom to care for Shelby until I returned from work. Though tempted to return home and confront the cheating duo, I realized I needed more than a mere confrontation. I craved revenge. As I drove back to my office, I began devising plans that would bring ruin upon my wife and her boss indefinitely. The electronics firm where I worked had multiple divisions. As a senior engineer in the medical equipment division, we shared a large complex with another division specializing in commercial security equipment. Upon reaching my office, I instructed my secretary to ensure I wasn't disturbed for the rest of the afternoon, then called my counterpart in the security division, Dan Taylor. A stellar engineer and longtime friend, he agreed to meet promptly. He mentioned he'd already be coming my way to drop off some blueprints for copying. I informed my secretary that Dan could enter my office as soon as he arrived. True to his word, Dan knocked on my door just 20 minutes later. I requested him to come in and close the door, noting that I needed his help. Dan remarked that I looked like I had seen a ghost, to which I responded by recounting the shocking discovery I'd made earlier. I explained to Dan that I had caught my wife and her boss having an affair in our house, specifically in our bedroom. Despite the disbelief, I assured him it was true, detailing how I found them together when I came home to pick up my daughter from school. I refrained from confronting them at the moment, prioritizing my daughter's well-being by having her wait in the car while I quietly left and took her to my mom's house. Dan expressed his sympathy and asked about my plan moving forward. I admitted uncertainty but emphasized the need for evidence, mentioning my intention to gather audio and video recordings of their encounters. I sought Dan's assistance in acquiring security cameras and microphones to discreetly place around the house. Dan questioned the certainty of there being a next time, suggesting that the incident might have been isolated. However, I dismissed this possibility, citing conversations between my wife and her boss about regular rendezvous over the past 6 months. I explained my reasoning, noting the lack of alternative locations and the convenience of my empty house during work hours. After a few more minutes of discussion, we delved into the details. Dan mentioned having access to a new beta line of wireless miniature cameras and microphones, compatible with my laptop or home computer. Additionally, he had a small voice-activated recorder I could discreetly place under Cher's car seat to capture any conversations she might have while driving. It would only record her side of the conversation, but it was better than nothing. I expressed gratitude and informed him I'd collect everything from his office the following day. Returning home that evening proved to be the most challenging task I'd ever faced. I wasn't sure if I could face my wife and pretend nothing had happened. I decided the best course of action was to make Cher believe I wasn't feeling well, which was true. I retrieved Shelby from my mom's, and upon arriving home, Sherry was preparing dinner in the kitchen. Upon seeing Shelby with me, she grew frantic. I questioned Sherry about her whereabouts and why she hadn't informed me about Shelby's illness, mentioning that I received a message from the school nurse on the answering machine. Sherry explained that she must have accidentally turned off her phone while showing houses and had been busy all day. I couldn't help but think cynically that she was likely preoccupied with her affair with her boss, instead of attending to our daughter. Despite this, Sherry hugged Shelby and apologized before helping her to bed. I acknowledged that, despite her flaws, my wife did love our kids, and it seemed I was the obstacle to her happiness. Sherry then returned to the kitchen to prepare soup for Shelby and finish dinner for the rest of us. Feeling unwell myself, I informed Sherry that I would sleep in the guest room that night, just in case I was contagious. She noted that I felt clammy and looked pale. Silently, I acknowledged the irony of feeling unwell after discovering my wife's affair. Without responding, I headed upstairs, initially dreading entering the master suite but needing my grooming supplies, toothbrush, and work attire for the next day. So I forced myself into the room. A window was open, and the scent of lovemaking had dissipated. The bed was neatly made. She must have changed the sheets. It pained me to look at it. All I could envision was her boss having sex with her, whispering sweet nothings about belonging to him alone forever. Anger surged within me, but I suppressed it. I needed to remain composed until I could unleash havoc upon them both, and I would, that much was certain. I gathered my necessities and retreated to the guest bedroom, shutting the door behind me. I stripped down to my underwear and slipped into bed. My body felt rigid. I wanted to weep, but I stifled the urge. I had a mission to accomplish, and I couldn't allow emotions to interfere. For hours, I lay in the darkness, sleep evading me. After tending to the kids and putting them to bed, my wife entered the room. I pretended to be asleep. She pressed her palm against my forehead before exiting the room, shutting the door behind her. Sherry typically handled taking the kids to school, so I rose early, showered, and left the house before her awakening. It probably struck her as odd, but I could simply attribute it to needing to compensate for lost time from yesterday when I felt unwell. Frankly, I didn't care much about her opinion at this point. I just wanted to be free. Free from what, until yesterday, I believed was a blissful marriage, founded on lifelong loyalty, honesty, and commitment. How painfully mistaken I was. Arriving at work before the rest of the staff, I brewed a pot of coffee and began outlining my strategies. I realized I needed to cancel our shared credit cards, transfer half of our joint accounts to a separate bank under my sole name, alter my will, life insurance, and 401k beneficiaries. Removing Sherry and naming only Shelby and Ryan. It felt like such a trivial effort to dissolve the last 13 years of my life. It should have been more challenging. Deep down, I suspected it would become harder at some point. I also understood the necessity of securing a competent divorce attorney to protect myself from Sherry's potential exploitation. Being in a no-fault divorce state, infidelity wouldn't significantly affect the financial settlement, but it might aid in retaining custody of my children. Sherry had demonstrated my insignificance in her life, yet she was a devoted mother, and I didn't want to deprive her of her children. I merely sought joint custody to ensure I remained a vital presence in their lives. I fought to suppress thoughts of our sex life and the humiliation of overhearing my wife praise her lover's superiority to me in every aspect. If I allowed myself to dwell on it now, I'd begin to doubt myself, which I couldn't afford at the moment. That reckoning would come later, and when it did, it would likely devastate me. With my to-do list complete, I phoned Dan's office. He assured me everything would be ready by noon, and offered to assist me in installing and operating the equipment. As I attempted to focus on clearing paperwork from my desk, I noticed Sherry's call on my cell phone. Despite her typically affectionate tone, her voice only fueled my anger this time. Sherry expressed concern about my well-being, mentioning that she hadn't been able to check on me before I left that morning. I responded vaguely, stating that I needed to clear my head. She suggested an idea to make me feel better that evening, but internally I couldn't help but feel resentful and deceived by her lies. However, I kept my response neutral, indicating that we would see. Sherry commented on my apparent lack of interest, to which I replied that I was preoccupied, rather than uninterested. We agreed to meet at home by 6, and she reassured me that she would be in the office all day if I needed to reach her. I phoned Dan, who confirmed everything was prepared, instructing me to meet him at the loading dock entrance. We loaded all the equipment into Dan's van, and with both of us working on the installation, we had it all set up and tested by 3:30. Then, we installed the software on my home office PC and configured a secure folder to collect and store everything captured by the cameras and microphones. We strategically placed bugs in the living room, kitchen, guest bedroom, and notably, the master suite, ensuring the latter had 4 cameras to capture nearly every activity. As an additional measure, we installed a camera and microphone in the master bathroom, just in case the couple decided to shower together after their encounter. The system was motion-activated, with the cameras triggering the microphones. I was prepared. That night was exceptionally challenging for me. After dinner, and once the kids were asleep, I followed my wife to our bedroom. I turned away from her and pretended to fall asleep. Sherry noticed the change in our usual routine and asked if everything was all right. I expressed some insecurities about whether I was enough for her, to which she reassured me that I was more than enough, and that she couldn't bear anything happening to me. She emphasized that I was her perfect lover. Despite her reassurances, I remained distant and brushed off her concern, stating that nothing was bothering me. I feigned exhaustion, closed my eyes, and attempted to sleep. Later, I heard Sherry softly crying. I felt no sympathy for her, but I pondered whether her tears stemmed from shame for her actions, or from feeling mistreated by me. Again, I rose before her and seized the chance to place the voice recorder beneath the seat of her car. I also reviewed the video and audio recordings from the installed equipment, confirming that everything from the previous night was captured clearly, even in the dim nighttime conditions of our bedroom. Initially, Sherry was a bit curt, mentioning that I had said some hurtful things the night before. Then she gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and her demeanor shifted to cheerful. Perhaps it was due to her afternoon plans with her boss. I hoped so. I was tired of games and wanted this ordeal done. I spent the morning working in my office, but kept glancing at my watch. Finally, at noon, I told my secretary I'd be gone for a few hours and put my plan in motion. I borrowed a company van and parked across from my house, waiting to see what happened. It wasn't until nearly 1 that I saw Cher's car arrive, open the garage door, and park in her usual spot. When she entered the house without closing the garage, I figured she was either leaving again or expecting someone. 10 minutes later, I realized she was expecting someone, as the same car from the day I caught them pulled into the garage, taking my place, just as he had taken my place in my wife's life. I saw him get out of the car and the garage door closed. I had to give it to them. They had the nerve to meet in my house, in my bed, to carry out their affair. It just proved they thought they wouldn't get caught or didn't care. Well, they'd soon find out they were wrong. They were caught, and I'd make sure they both cared. With this final proof of my wife's infidelity, and knowing I'd soon have all the visual proof I needed of their affair, I finally let the tears fall. For 13 years, I was convinced my loving wife would never cheat on me, just as I'd never cheat on her. With the tears came doubts. Was he a better lover? Maybe better looking, but neither of us was exceptional. Why risk our marriages? I desperately wanted to confront them, but why? What would it achieve? I'd catch them, but I'd already done that once. Would I feel better by confronting her lover? Yes, but I'd likely go to jail. By this time, neither of them was worth it. My only worry was how this would affect my kids, and his. As I was prepared to confront him, just as he had confronted me, by 2:30 they must have finished, as the garage door opened and he left. 15 minutes later, my wife did the same, closing the garage door behind her. I knew she'd return home with the kids by 3:30, so I quickly parked in the garage and made my way to my home office. I didn't want to review all the footage, just ensure the evidence was safely on my hard drive. After 10 minutes, I'd had my fill. It wasn't an exact replay of their previous encounter, but it was explicit. They began by having lovemaking on the kitchen table where I eat. They joked about how many times they wondered if I'd ever realize I was dining where he had been intimate with her so often. Then they moved to our bedroom, though not before her lover suggested using my daughter's room for a change of scenery. My wife adamantly refused, stating it was off limits to involve their kids' rooms. At least she seemed to have some principles, just not concerning me. In the bedroom, they resumed their activities. I noticed neither of them expressed love, but my wife continued to praise her boss as the best lover she'd ever had. However, I couldn't comprehend why they then moved to the throw rug by the living room fireplace, where they engaged once more. When finished, I found it strange that she didn't bother changing the sheets, assuming she would do so when she returned with the kids at 3:30. This gave her plenty of time to air out the room and remove any evidence, since I rarely arrived home before 6. Having secured the evidence I needed on my hard drive, I shut down the system and left the house without bothering to check the assumed mess on our marriage bed. I'd seen enough, and although my heart was hardened against my wife, I still felt sick inside, a sickness soon replaced by burning anger and hatred. I may have even smiled, knowing the hell I was about to unleash on their cheating heads. Back at work, I briefed Dan on everything. Like me, he couldn't comprehend how a supposedly loving wife like Sherry could do what was now clear. Not only did she break our sacred vows, but she also went out of her way to humiliate me to her lover, always affirming his superiority. All these thoughts plunged my soul into a deep abyss of pain and despair, from which I knew I had to emerge to complete my task of destroying them both. I needed to find a good divorce lawyer, and Dan suggested contacting the law firm the company used for recommendations. I spoke to a corporate lawyer there, who gave me 3 names of divorce lawyers known for protecting husbands' rights. The first one was retiring and not taking new clients, but the second one agreed to meet me the next afternoon at 3. With that settled, I resolved to handle canceling credit cards, changing beneficiaries, and transferring funds the next morning. When I returned home that night, Sherry was in the kitchen preparing dinner, while the kids did their homework in their rooms. She wore a yellow sundress and looked beautiful. For a moment, I thought my heart would break all over again. She was smiling and seemed so happy. I assumed it was her usual post-afternoon delight mood. She greeted me and asked about my day, mentioning that hers was great due to making a sale. I responded with mild interest, aware of the reason behind her happiness. I asked if anything else notable happened that day or if she met any interesting people, to which she denied, stating that she was focused on work and then came home to her family. Despite her reassurance, I couldn't shake the suspicion of her affair. As I headed upstairs to change clothes, I noticed the sheets had been replaced and the room aired out. Upon returning to the kitchen, I mentioned the water on the shower floor and asked if she had showered that afternoon. She appeared startled and denied it, suggesting a possible clogged drain. I speculated about the possibility of someone sneaking into the house for a rendezvous and showering afterward, which seemed to unsettle her. She attempted to brush it off with humor. As dinner progressed, conversation was minimal. I surprised Sherry by switching seats with her, prompting her to question the change. I explained it as a desire for a change of scenery. She appeared puzzled and ate little, mainly moving food around on her plate. During dinner, the kids talked about their day, but Sherry and I mostly listened, making occasional comments. After we all helped clean the dishes, I returned to my office to work on my project. I reviewed footage from that day and selected suitable stills to turn into photographs, which I downloaded to a photo file for printing. Next, I carefully crafted wording for the signs I would create with the photographs. All that remained was to visit my lawyer to initiate the divorce, get my finances in order, and await the next visit from my wife and her lover. When I finally went to bed that night, Sherry was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. I was fairly certain my actions that evening had given her something to ponder. Not that it mattered. There was nothing she could say or do to change my mind about divorcing her for her infidelity. And there was a small silver lining in the fact that I believe I'd managed to make her at least somewhat uneasy. Today was Tuesday, and she had mentioned making another sale on Thursday, so I took that as a signal that she and her lover would be meeting on that day. That would also mark the day I brought them down. The following morning, I rose early again, showered, and left before Sherry woke up. I had a lot to accomplish and wanted to allocate as much time as possible to get it done. My lawyer appointment wasn't until 3, so I had plenty of time to handle all the financial matters. First, I visited HR, where I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance, and $401k from Sherry to Shelby and Ryan. I received some odd looks from the woman assisting me, but I didn't feel obligated to explain my actions to her or anyone else. Next, I canceled all our joint credit cards and obtained new ones in my name alone. Then, I proceeded to the bank, where I transferred half of the funds from our joint checking and savings accounts to another bank in my name. I knew I needed to address our home, but I presumed the courts would allow Sherry to stay there with the kids, so I postponed action on that front until I consulted with my lawyer. At 3, I met with my lawyer, finding him to be agreeable enough. He cautioned me that, since we were in a no-fault state, Sherry would likely get custody of Shelby and Ryan. And I'd lose the house and half of everything else to my wife, even with proof of her infidelity. I instructed him on how I wanted the petition written, and when he expressed doubt about my chances of taking nearly everything from her, I reassured him I was confident I could persuade her to agree to whatever I wanted. He wasn't pleased, but he complied with my demands, assuring me he would have everything prepared for her to be served Friday morning. I also had him draft papers to file against her boss and his company for intentionally wrecking my marriage. Those documents would also be ready by Friday morning. I was prepared. When I returned home that evening, I kept my demeanor cool toward Sherry. Frankly, I had reached my limit and just wanted the whole ordeal to end so I could move on with my life. I knew there was still a lot of pain and heartache ahead, but I acknowledged there was no turning back. Besides, I'd finally be sharing the anguish and misery with my unfaithful wife and her despicable lover. After a subdued dinner with minimal conversation, I retired to my study, printed the photos of the lovers I intended to use, and crafted the signs without interruption. I also found time to compose a letter to Greg Allen's wife, enclosing prints of the large photos I planned to use on the posters, informing her that I had plenty of video evidence to provide her in case she decided to divorce her husband, as I was divorcing mine. Shortly after 11, I went to our bedroom to ensure Sherry was asleep, then made my way to her car, retrieved the voice-activated recorder from beneath her seat, rewound it, and listened to its contents. I overheard one side of a conversation that sounded like it was with Greg. The caller expressed gratitude for their time together that afternoon and mentioned missing Greg after they were together. They discussed the idea of spending a whole week together and fabricating a story about a real estate convention they must attend. The caller mentioned having to give Jack occasional attention to keep him happy, but expressed a desire to be exclusively with Greg. They confirmed plans for Thursday afternoon and ended the call. I was taken aback to discover that her words didn't sting as much as they had in the past. Perhaps there was still hope for me after all. Little did she realize how soon she would belong solely to him forever. And the knowledge that I was just one day away from dismantling their comfortable lives filled me with a sense of satisfaction. Revenge, I was realizing, wielded formidable power. I swapped out the tape with a fresh one and returned the recorder under her seat, hoping it would capture evidence of her anguish the next day when her world crumbled. I hardly slept a wink that night, not because I was heartbroken. I had surpassed that. No, my sleeplessness stemmed from the anticipation of everything I hoped would unfold the following day. For the last time, I rose from bed while Sherry continued to slumber. I stood gazing at the woman who had once been my love, the mother of my children, the woman I had imagined spending the rest of my days with. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized I had shared my bed with her for the final time. Never again would our bodies entwine in passion. Never again would we cuddle or discuss our future. Our future was non-existent. As I turned away from her and departed, I pondered whether she comprehended the toll she was about to pay for betraying me. She likely didn't, but she would soon learn. After showering, I left the house, stopped for breakfast at a diner, then briefly swung by work to inform my secretary of my absence for the day. I phoned Dan and briefed him on the impending events. He wished me luck, cautioned me to be careful, and requested that I keep him updated on the proceedings. I made a brief visit to my lawyer's office to ensure all was in order for serving my wife and Greg Allen the following day. Following that, I called my wife to arrange picking up the kids from school. My mother had expressed a desire to have them for the long weekend since they had no school on Friday. Thus, I planned to swing by the house around 3:45 to gather some belongings and transport the kids directly to Mom's. Sherry enthusiastically approved, even suggesting we spend Saturday in bed together, in her most seductive tone. I agreed nonchalantly before ending the call. I had reached a point where I couldn't tolerate her deceit any longer. I took my time returning home. By 12:30, I was parked nearby, awaiting the imminent events. My car was mostly concealed from view, but I had a clear line of sight to any vehicle entering my driveway. I didn't need to witness the garage door's movements. My wife and her lover were nothing if not predictable, and I was familiar with their routine. At 12:50, Sherry's car rolled into the driveway, followed 5 minutes later by Greg Allen. The trap was set, and I was poised to ensnare them. I should have felt anguish, knowing my wife and her boss were engaging in pleasure in our marital bed, while I waited around the corner for them to finish. Yet she had lost her ability to inflict pain upon me. It was astonishing how composed I felt as I envisioned the activities I knew they were engaging in together. It was almost reminiscent of recalling a low-budget adult film, lacking in substance but with a satisfying conclusion. Around 10 minutes to 3, I observed Alan's car reverse out of the driveway. 10 minutes later, Sherry followed suit. As she drove off, I observed her applying fresh lipstick. Once they were out of sight, I pulled into my garage and shut the door. With limited time on my hands, I headed to my office and reviewed the footage from that afternoon's encounter. Everything was captured, including the hurtful insults about his superiority in bed compared to me. However, this time, their words didn't affect me. After ensuring the footage was securely stored on my hard drive, I spent the next 10 minutes carrying my handcrafted signs, adorned with their photographs, upstairs and positioning them near the front door for easy access. Then I packed essentials, like a toothbrush and clothes for Shelby and Ryan, into my car. The only remorse I felt about my impending actions was for the pain I was about to inflict on my beloved children. Yet I found solace in knowing I hadn't caused the pain of their parents' separation. That responsibility rested solely on their mother's shoulders. She chose to engage in a prolonged affair, ultimately tearing our family apart. At 3:15, I drove to their school and was waiting when the final bell rang to pick them up. I informed them they'd spend the weekend with Grandma, which thrilled them, given her penchant for spoiling them. 45 minutes later, I dropped them off and returned home ready to set my plan in motion. And thus, we come full circle to where we began. Bed, table, and rug displayed on the lawn, adorned with signs, watched by neighbors awaiting Sherry's return to the dreadful truth that I held all, the knowledge. That night, I expected to hear from Sherry, but I didn't. There was a late call from her cell phone, but when I answered, silence greeted me. An hour after Sherry departed, the police paid me a visit. While understanding, they insisted I remove the signs and photographs to avoid disturbing the peace and public indecency charges. I complied. They had served their purpose, seen by my wife, and from the look on her face before I turned away, I knew her life had begun its descent into chaos. That evening, I drowned my sorrows in a substantial amount of Maker's Mark and drifted into an alcoholic stupor. Friday morning greeted me with a monstrous hangover, yet despite it I felt empowered, though saddened and alone. I found strength in knowing I had subdued my anger long enough to exact revenge on my unfaithful wife and her lover. By noon, I glimpsed out the front window to find the rug, kitchen table, and bed gone, leaving only the mattress and stained sheets behind. I would dispose of those later. The morning passed uneventfully, but by 3 in the afternoon, chaos erupted. I was certain that Greg Allen's wife had received the letter and photographs that morning, and my lawyer had informed me that both Sherry and Greg, along with his partners, had been served at their workplaces. He recounted how Sherry collapsed in tears upon being served, while Greg disregarded her, unleashing threats against me. His partners retreated behind closed doors for 15 minutes before emerging to present Sherry with her final check and informing Greg that his partnership was terminated. When Greg informed them of his refusal to sell to them, they cited their corporate bylaws morality clause regarding fraternization with staff members. This provision empowered them to sever all ties with him and his mistress. Concurrently, the receptionist at the front desk relayed that his wife was on the phone, urgently requesting to speak with him. She had received the letter and photos I had sent, informing him not to return home and notifying him of her intent to file for divorce the following day. Later, I was informed by one of the agency employees' husbands that after Greg was escorted out of the building, everyone turned their backs on my soon-to-be ex-wife. She remained on the floor for about 30 minutes, crying inconsolably. Eventually, she gathered herself enough to leave, though no one knew her whereabouts. The next day, Sherry finally called me, sounding distraught. She inquired about the children and whether they knew about the situation. I assured her they were safe at my mother's and wouldn't hear the details from me. She thanked me for my discretion and asked to retrieve some belongings, to which I agreed, offering to leave for a few hours. She requested to stay and talk, but I declined, leading to more tears from her. She pleaded for my understanding, expressing remorse and claiming she never intended to hurt me. I laughed at her apology, questioning how she could claim innocence when she had expressed love and longing for her lover, comparing him favorably to me. I accused her of betraying me with her words to him, saying I had recordings of her confessing these feelings. Despite her denial, I insisted that her words were recorded and nothing she said could change how I felt about her. She professed her love for me, claiming she had always loved only me and didn't understand why she said those things to Greg. She explained that she had done it to boost his ego because he complained about his wife. I questioned her explanation, pointing out that she had torn me down to him and had been intimate with him for 6 months. She insisted she never meant to hurt me and didn't mean any of it. When I pressed her for an explanation, she admitted that it felt dirty with Greg and that she felt she should be dirty with him, keeping it separate from what she had with me, which she described as loving and clean. I expressed disbelief at her actions and called her sick, admitting my own foolishness for not seeing it sooner. She begged for a chance to make it right, insisting that she loved only me and belonged to me. She pleaded for forgiveness and offered to come to me immediately, begging me not to leave her. I informed Sherry that I no longer loved her and that she was the one who left me. I condemned her actions with Greg over the past 6 months, stating that her behavior proved she didn't love me. I expressed disgust towards her and eagerly awaited her departure from my life. I rejected any possibility of reconciliation, expressing my disdain for her after what she had done with Greg. I emphasized that any future interaction would only be for the sake of our children, whom she had also damaged. I explained that while I wanted to spare our children pain, I had no intention of sparing her any consequences for her actions. I wanted her to feel the same pain she had caused me and Greg's wife. When she questioned why I told Greg's wife about their affair, I retorted that what she and Greg did was unfair to me and our children. I justified informing Greg's wife by highlighting the destruction of my family, the betrayal of our marital vows, and the need for Greg's wife to know the truth. Sherry expressed her desire to fight for our marriage, stating that she didn't want a divorce. I responded by saying there was nothing left to fight for and that I would rather die than remain married to her. I accused her of being delusional and out of her mind. She urged me to read the divorce petition she served me with, claiming that if I agreed to joint custody for our children, I could stay in the house and receive half of our assets. However, she threatened to share the videos of her affair if I didn't agree to her terms. When I doubted her willingness to follow through with the threat, she insisted that she could and would do it, out of hatred towards me. She pleaded with me to sign the divorce papers, but I remained firm in my decision. In the end, she begged me to sign the papers, but I refused, insisting that she should sign them instead. After hanging up on her, Sherry signed the divorce papers, and the divorce was finalized in 6 months. She now lives with Shelby and Ryan in our former home, while I reside in a nearby condo. Despite the divorce, we remained in the same school district to minimize disruption for the kids, although they still felt the pain of the breakup. Shelby disclosed that their mother acknowledged her mistake, accepting that our marriage couldn't overcome it. However, we reassured the kids that we would always be there for them. As for what Sherry told her parents and sister about the breakup, I'm uncertain, but they still communicate with me, indicating she likely didn't place blame solely on me. My mother perceived the divorce as something neither Sherry nor I could move past. I had the chance to retrieve the audio recorder from Sherry's car one last time, capturing a memorable conversation. She called Greg and thanked him for their time together, expressing concern about my suspicions and suggesting they pause their affair temporarily. Upon arriving home, she discovered signs and photographs revealing my knowledge of her infidelity, leading to her panic and realization of the consequences. She called Greg in distress, informing him that I knew everything about their affair, and broke down into tears. It's been over a year since we endured those trying times, and gradually, I'm beginning to piece things back together. I still steer clear of dating, and will likely continue to do so for a while. The idea of reliving what I've just gone through makes me wary of diving into another serious relationship. Shelby mentioned that her mom went on one date but returned home in tears, and as far as she knows, hasn't dated since. Sherry found work as a receptionist in a retirement village and has put her real estate career on hold, at least for now. I've never found out if she keeps in touch with Greg Allen, and frankly, I don't care. Greg Allen and his wife divorced, and he's been struggling to find employment. Even though I didn't share the videos of their intimate encounters with anyone, Sherry knew I wasn't sympathetic towards Greg. It seems many businesses are wary of hiring someone with a reputation for seducing married women and causing marriages to dissolve. Although I blurred Sherry's face in the videos, I retained all the audio. I recently heard that Greg's ex-wife is dating a kind police officer, and it appears to be serious. Good for her. Speaking of Greg's former employer, to avoid negative publicity, they offered me a generous settlement to prevent a lawsuit. I accepted. As far as I'm concerned, that chapter is closed. For now, my focus is solely on my children and their future. Perhaps one day, my own future will take precedence as well.
Story 2.
Wanda Nielsen is granted use of the house until the children graduate from high school, with Mr. Nielsen continuing mortgage and utility payments. She is also entitled to half the value of her husband's business, and Mr. Nielsen will maintain payments for her vehicle. Mrs. Nielsen is awarded 60% of all assets, encompassing bank accounts, investments, and retirement accounts. Additionally, primary custody of the children is granted to Mrs. Nielsen, with visitation following standard protocols, including Mr. Nielsen having 2 consecutive weeks during the summer and every other weekend. Child support is set at $750 per month per child, totaling $1,500 per month. Considering Mrs. Nielsen's absence from the workforce for the last 5 years, maintenance of $2,000 per month is added. The divorce will be finalized in 90 days unless Mr. Nielsen revokes the petition. Concluding the proceedings, Judge Marie Matthews banged her gavel. As she began to rise, I uttered the single word that would lead to changes dominating the next several months of my life. I responded to her challenge, stating that I wasn't sure what was difficult to understand. I offered to provide a definition if the word was challenging for her. Judge Matthews froze mid-motion, her head swiveling so fast that it seemed her neck might snap off. A look of disbelief adorned her face, as if she couldn't fathom someone stating that word in her presence. Slowly, she returned to her chair. As she moved, her features shifted from shock to abject fury. Once she regained her former position, the frosty glare she directed at me could easily have frozen water on the surface of the sun. To say she was angry would be an understatement. She declared that she wasn't stupid and knew what was about to happen. She didn't care. The next few minutes were planned, and she gave me 1 minute to apologize or she would cite me for contempt of court. I spoke, saying that at least she would have made one correct ruling that day. I expressed having nothing but contempt for the situation. My lawyer harshly whispered in my ear, fumbling through his briefcase, possibly searching for something to silence me. In response, she sneered, striking her gavel again, and threatened to see how much contempt I would have after 30 days in jail. I retorted by suggesting 60 days and wondered if she cared to try for more. Expressing my belief that if she got laid occasionally, she might not be such a difficult person, I extended my right hand with the middle finger up. While mimicking the gesture with my left hand, I suggested she could ride them to a climax, perhaps making her less of the person she appeared to be. In my view, she was in more dire need of a change than any woman in history. Holy. I reflected on the situation, thinking that someone might have dialed emergency around that time. I considered two possibilities. Either she was on the verge of a stroke, or her head was going to explode. Surprisingly, the smoke coming out of her ears wasn't visible. I didn't think it was possible for someone's face to turn that shade of red. After my outburst, she was clearly upset, and she sentenced me to 90 days. Her voice sounded satanic, and the bailiffs took hold of me. My lawyer had a woeful look on his face, and the courtroom was shocked when I couldn't hold in my laughter. This probably explained the visits by psychologists I had in lockup over the next couple of weeks. The letter from my lawyer's law firm the next day stating they were dropping me as a client was not a surprise. So you're probably wondering what all that was about. Perhaps a little background is in order. My name is Michael Nielsen, and I'm currently 31 years old. I was born to a very nice middle-class couple in the heartland of America. I was raised on traditional values where there was a strong sense of right and wrong. You respected those that deserved respect, and you didn't cheat when you gave your word. It meant something. The ethos I grew up with was to work hard, be generous with what you have, and live up to your values. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Of course, most people never think about the flip side to that. Do unto others as they have done unto you. The Christian thing to do is to turn the other cheek, but unfortunately, I have never been good at that. I've always had what has been described as an extreme stubborn streak, combined with my sense of justice. Well, it sometimes got kind of ugly when I made up my mind that someone had done me wrong and set a course of action to deal with it. Nothing could dissuade me from my path. There was one time in high school when I was going out with Cheryl Haskins. We had been dating for a couple of months by this time, and we had an argument about something, leading to our breakup. I put that in quotes because it was kind of understood that it was only temporary, and we would apologize to each other a couple of days later and get back together. It wasn't the first time that it happened. We would just use the weekend to cool off and make up on Monday. Unfortunately, I happened to be walking past the theater on Saturday evening and saw my cousin Harold escorting Cheryl into the theater. Two things here. Harold and I were more like brothers than cousins. We were the same age and had been practically inseparable for as long as I can remember. His family lived on the same block as me, and we grew up together. Second, I knew that he also liked Cheryl. He knew that we had broken up, but he also knew that we would probably get back together after the weekend. But we simply don't do that to each other. From that moment on, he was dead to me. When Cheryl tried to talk to me on Monday, I simply refused to acknowledge her presence. At church on Sunday, Harold came up to me and tried to talk. I stared at him without saying a word. When he finished talking, I turned around and walked away. His family came over for Sunday dinner. I ignored him. He tried to play video games with me. I stopped playing and went to my room. Our parents tried several times to get me to talk to him, but I refused every time. Even a year later, after I actually took his girlfriend from him, I still refused to have anything to do with him. Oh, I did smack him up when he confronted me about stealing his girlfriend. But that was it. He sent me a wedding invitation. Years later, I ignored it. When I married Wanda, every member of my extended family got an invitation except him. Okay, so I'm a bit of an idiot and hold a grudge. The thing is, when someone wrongs me, I don't forgive unless it was an honest mistake. What Harold and Cheryl did was intentional. Right now, many of you think I'm an idiot. If that's the case, let me annoy you snowflakes a bit more. I firmly believe that you shouldn't do the crime if you can't do the time. If you are foolish and mess up, you should fully face the consequences of your actions. If you drive drunk and get caught, expect to lose your license for a while, pay higher insurance, and perform community service or whatever else is involved. If your job depends on you driving, you lose your job. I call that a foolish tax. If a girl chooses to engage without protection and ends up pregnant at 18 years old, her foolish tax is being called mommy for the next 18 years. If a guy chooses to bump bellies with his prom date and impregnates her, he should be required to step up and take care of the kid he was half responsible for. Choices have consequences. It's called personal responsibility. I refuse to have to pay for someone else's idiocy. So I worked hard through high school and got pretty good grades. I earned some nice scholarships and went to college. I did well with the ladies and still kept my grades up. I was always on the better-looking side and I worked to maintain my health. Yeah, I had gotten into more than my fair share of fights in high school because of my personal beliefs. I won more than I lost. Still, I was in good physical shape. and it seemed that the women found me attractive enough. I graduated with an economics degree and an accounting minor. I went on to get my MBA, then got a decent job at a large company making really good money. Being single with not a lot of bills to pay, I began playing the stock market. I found I kind of had a knack for that and made out rather well. I had been working for a few months when I met Wanda at a party. We hit it off well and I asked her out on a date. She accepted and it went from there. I have to say she was beautiful. I kind of laugh at that. Seriously, how many guys ever say that their girlfriend is ugly? Sure, she may be unattractive to someone else, but to them, she is beautiful anyway. I can say that Wanda is beautiful because she always attracts stares whenever we are out, and every one of my friends has commented on how they will try to move in if we ever break up. Even some of my lesbian friends have commented on trying to turn her if she becomes available. I eventually asked. She accepted and we got married. I should probably mention that Wanda did go to college. I like to joke that she went for her Mrs. degree. She didn't get that, but she did graduate with a degree in art history, which qualified her for her job as a barista at Starbucks. For those who are confused, and Mrs. degree signifies a girl that goes to college to put off adulting for a few years and graduates with a husband to take care of them for the rest of their lives. Yes, I'm an arrogant idiot. Get lost. So we settled into marital bliss. She quit her job a week before the wedding and settled into becoming Susie Homemaker. Our bed life was great, and we bought a nice 3-bedroom house. I was doing well at my job as well as raking in some nice money playing the stock market. We weren't really living extravagantly, so we were able to set aside a considerable amount of cash. All my bonuses went into our investments, along with maxing out my Roth contributions. I aimed to retire before I turned 40 and savor life. Excelling in my profession, my employer rewarded me with substantial bonuses and promotions, putting me on the fast track up the corporate ladder. A few years into our marriage, I returned home one Friday evening to find Wanda dressed to the nines with a huge smile on her face. "Hurry up and get showered and changed. We're going out to celebrate tonight." Daddy. Holy moly, did she just say what I thought she said? I was shocked. We had been trying for a few months now, so it wasn't like this just came out of the blue. Still, it was a surprise when she said that it finally happened. I took her in my arms and swung her around as I planted kisses all over her face, figuring that we would be muting our celebrations because of her pregnancy and then the baby. For a while, we lit up the town that night. The next several months consisted of joyous times and preparing for the new life that we were bringing into the world. We got another shock a couple of months later. Twins. There were 2 little girls in there. I couldn't wait until I could start spoiling them and having 2 little daddy's girls wrapping me around their fingers. I was on top of the world. The day finally came. We rushed to the hospital and our 2 little girls were born a few hours later. They were beautiful, healthy, and had all their fingers and toes. Being twins, they had to stay in the hospital a couple of days longer than normal, but everything turned out fine. When we took them home, both families were there to greet us. Everyone was happy. I noticed my mom staring at them almost constantly. I think she was so happy because I finally gave her the grandchildren she had been wanting. So life had changed for us. I decided that working for the big company was keeping me away from my family too much. I had a ton of money available, so I decided to form my own company. I was doing pretty well investing and playing the market, so I decided to get the necessary licenses and open my own investment firm. I had already been helping a few of my friends and relatives, so I talked to them about becoming official clients. That started things moving. Once I opened, I had several former coworkers move their portfolios over to me as well. Within a year, I had a decent client list, and several of them were discussing with their friends about moving over to me as well. When you're on top of the world, the only direction you can go is down. It was the girls' second birthday party. We turned it into a full-on production. Sure, they would never remember it, but it was a celebration. They would be able to watch the videos when they were older and enjoy it. Then all the family from both sides was there. We were all having a phenomenal time until I was just about to come out of the bedroom after using the in-suite bathroom. The hall bathroom had been in use. Just before I was about to get to the door, I heard my mom talking to her sister in the hallway. She mentioned that she couldn't figure out where those blue eyes came from. Her sister, Mayan, suggested asking me about it. Mom replied, saying that she couldn't imagine what would happen if I found out that they weren't mine. She expressed concern about how happy I was and believed that it would probably be devastating for me. I couldn't listen to the rest. I quietly retraced my steps back to the bathroom and locked the door behind me. I had to think. They had to be mine. Surely someone in our families had blue eyes? My eyes were kind of a mud brown. Wanda's were more hazel, I thought. I went through a mental picture of everyone on all my relatives. The lone person I could think of without brown eyes was my cousin Mary, whose green eyes originated from her non-blood-related father's side. Contemplating Wanda's family, I couldn't recall anyone on her side with blue eyes. After a while, I realized I needed to compose myself and rejoin the festivities before being missed. Suppressing my emotions, I put on a cheerful demeanor and returned to the party, enduring a challenging day. Although I acted as expected, I mentally strategized about what to do later. Eventually, things quieted down, everyone departed, and while putting the girls to bed that night, I scrutinized their features. Some resembled Wanda, but others were unfamiliar, and I found none definitively attributable to me. The next day, while Wanda napped with the girls, I ordered supplies delivered to my office using a company credit card to keep the invoice hidden. Simultaneously, I researched local PI firms, as the suspicion that Wanda had cheated on me nearly 3 years ago became overwhelming. If she did cheat then, was she still involved in infidelity? I needed proof. A few days later, the ordered items arrived, and I had also met with and hired a company named Pro Investigations, providing them with all the necessary information to hack into Wanda's cell phone, tablet, and laptop. Concurrently, I initiated some financial moves. If she wasn't cheating and the girls were genuinely mine, these actions wouldn't matter. However, if my suspicions were accurate, it would safeguard my money from her reach. I refused to fund her unfaithfulness or someone else's children. While the girls were innocent sufferers, so was I. If she chose to mess around and get pregnant by someone else, they could bear the financial responsibility. Nothing was finalized, but I awaited the proof. 2 weeks later, I received the letter at the office. Locking my door, I opened it and cried for an hour upon confirming they weren't mine. Deep down, I had sensed the truth, but clung to hope. The following day, my PI met with me, providing all the proof he had obtained. Wanda was still involved with her blonde-haired, blue-eyed personal trainer, meeting him a couple of days a week and even taking the girls to his apartment. The audio confirmed their awareness of the real seed donor. The subsequent afternoon, I consulted a divorce lawyer, rejecting his conventional advice, prioritizing the children's well-being. I insisted on preparing the documents, but delayed filing until deemed appropriate. The preparations took 2 months, and with zero net income and assets on paper, I left Wanda surprised when my cousin Howard and his wife Cheryl showed up that weekend. I explained that Howard and Cheryl had come to see me in my office a couple of weeks ago. After some serious discussions, they acknowledged their wrongdoing, sincerely apologized, and I decided it was time to let things go. God damn, you people are so gullible. Yes, we reconciled. It's entirely true that Howard and Cheryl did visit me in my office last week. They did apologize again. That's all accurate. I'm an honest man, and I'm not lying about any of that. I genuinely forgave them and welcomed them back into my life. However, I may have overlooked a couple of irrelevant details. Just coincidences. Cheryl's family includes members who, let's say, aren't above bending a few minor laws. Some are large and don't hesitate to engage in the occasional barroom brawl. There's even speculation, irrelevant to this story, that a few might be enforcers for a local group of shadier businessmen, but it's just gossip from those who don't like them. A couple of days before Howard and Cheryl's visit, there was a news story about a personal trainer at a local gym being mugged shortly after leaving work. Foolishly attempting to fight off the 5 muggers, they took his wallet, car, and stripped him undressed, proceeding to brutally assault him, resulting in a broken jaw, shattered nose, broken ribs, a broken arm, dislocated kneecap, and ruptured testicles. He'll be in the hospital for at least a couple of weeks. The police should address the crime issue in town, but there are no suspects since the attackers wore dark clothes, gloves, and ski masks. Doctors expect the blonde-haired, blue-eyed sufferer to fully recover after reconstructive surgery and significant physical therapy, although engaging in closeness might be unlikely. Over the next couple of months, he'll discover his car was taken to a chop shop, his credit cards maxed out, bank accounts emptied, and his identity stolen for the dark web, leading to years of legal battles. Surprisingly, Wanda was despondent for about a week after the mugging, possibly concerned about the rising crime rate. Despite my offer to enhance home security, she remained unsettled. On Monday morning, I instructed my lawyer to complete the paperwork and file it, aiming to have her served on Friday. In the late afternoon, he attempted to persuade me to make changes, but I remained firm. By Tuesday, the forms were ready for my review and signature. Meeting him at his office to finalize everything, he once again warned me against my course of action. After some thought, I decided to humor him, giving her the house and even throwing in the investments. However, I made it clear I wouldn't pay a dime beyond that. If she chose to keep the house, she'd be responsible for the mortgage and utilities. Notably, there hadn't been a dime in the investment accounts for over a month. I had no issue giving her 100% of zero. Unbeknownst to Wanda, I had been relocating all my tools and equipment from the garage. Gradually, I also moved belongings I wanted to keep out of the house, mostly from my home office. Tools and larger items found storage on Howard and Cheryl's ranch, while less valuable, smaller items were transferred to a one-bedroom apartment in a complex owned by an offshore LLC. The owners of the LLC were surprisingly challenging to locate and verify. Friday morning arrived at last. I headed to work as usual. A couple of days earlier, I had Howard assist me in moving my truck to the office. I left my car, got into the pickup, and drove to the bank. At the bank, I cleared out all the accounts, leaving $100 in checking and savings. Next, I emptied the safety deposit box. I then drove to the ranch and combined all the cash and contents of the safety deposit box with my other belongings. I didn't want to risk them discovering a newly rented box at another bank and seizing it. Also, I wanted to avoid anyone tracing a wire transfer. Besides, I anticipated needing the cash later. You might be wondering why I trusted Howard and Cheryl. It was straightforward. The mortgage on their ranch was held by a certain offshore LLC with murky ownership. Moreover, despite our issues, Howard is still family to us, and you don't mess with family. The rest of the family takes such matters personally. There was much joy in the family when Howard and I finally reconciled. Returning home late morning, I pulled over a couple of blocks away to check the GPS I had installed on Wanda's car. As expected, she was at the mall. Rushing home, I parked in the driveway. Over the past few days, I had packed up the rest of my clothes and belongings and placed them in the garage. Tossing the few boxes in the truck, I went inside, grabbed the remaining clothes from the closet and dresser, not bothering to pack them, just grabbing them by the arm, load hangers and all. It took only a couple of trips to toss them all inside the cab of the truck. I didn't bother closing the garage or even the front door. My cell phone rang as I was leaving the house. It was Wanda. Presumably, her cards didn't work when she tried to check out. Glancing at the GPS signal moving in my direction, I laughed, tossed my phone onto the table, and walked out the door. Within minutes, I was several blocks away. Arriving at my new apartment, I transferred everything from my truck into the appropriate rooms. 3 beers later, everything was put away, and as I sat back in my recliner, my new cell phone rang. Only a couple of people had this number, and my soon-to-be ex-wife was not one of them. I answered the call, and the voice on the other end informed me that she had been served. They assured me that I would have the video shortly. I responded with a simple, "Okay, thank you," before disconnecting. True to their word, 15 minutes later, I received the video in my email. To say she was shocked would be an understatement. Unfortunately, the video only covered her being served until she dropped to the floor. The process server checked to ensure she wasn't injured and left. The video concluded. At that point, I would have liked to witness her reaction once she began reading the divorce petition, realizing I had DNA and video evidence of her infidelity. From that moment on, things moved at the speed of a glacier. I received several phone calls, a few from my old office, as she had called multiple times trying to reach me. Apparently, she didn't believe them when they informed her that I had resigned and hadn't worked there for the last 2 weeks. She even showed up in person, demanding to see me. But that didn't end well for her. It took the police being called to escort her off the property. Howard made a couple of calls. She began pressuring him to reach me, suspecting his sudden appearance was too coincidental with my abrupt divorce. Restraining orders for my former company in Howard were filed, compelling her to cease. 2 weeks later, my lawyer finally contacted her to find out who her lawyer was, but she hadn't hired one yet. First off, she was quickly running out of money. All she had was the cash in her purse and $200 I left in the bank accounts. She started leaning on her parents for support. I relaxed without starting any projects, planning to be unavailable for a while. That and the desire to avoid leaving anything she could take. Eventually, she got a lawyer, and meetings were scheduled. I declined to attend, giving my lawyer firm instructions. Not a single penny more. Tempers flared at those meetings, leading to arbitration, which I had to attend, but they didn't go well. During the proceedings, questions arose about the whereabouts of the money. Accusations were thrown, with her questioning, "Where's all the money, idiot? What money? All our money? We're flat broke. In fact, I'm living in the cheapest single-bedroom apartment I could find, chosen for affordability and my acquaintance with the owner. All investments, checking, and savings disappeared due to a disastrous investment, investing in a cheating wife." Well, that was true. I didn't know where all those offshore banks kept their cash. "We're giving her the house with her name as the only one on the title," my lawyer suggested. He could have been more forceful, but he sounded like someone observing a tornado-ravaged house, commenting that at least the rubble hadn't caught on fire. "The mortgage is maxed out, and I can't possibly afford the monthly payments." Wanda screamed, and it pretty much went downhill from there. Child support? Not my kids, not my problem. Spousal maintenance? Alimony for you Felicians out there. No job, no income, no way. She demands 70% of the liquid assets, but there are none. 50% of the business? Good luck. 150% of the retirement? Lost it all. Arbitration failed spectacularly. That brings us to our day in court facing the dishonorable Judge Marie Matthews. She was the most feminist, man-hating family court judge, harsher on men whose wives cheated. Yeah, I was screwed. Planning to criticize me for thinking I could convince them there was no money? You'd be wrong. Aware they could check accounts, I wasn't surprised when the judge used those numbers to calculate my liabilities. The thing is, they had no way to access it. I needed the time to transfer funds around through different banks and different accounts. I even went so far as to personally pull all the money out of one bank, then deposited parts of the withdrawal into several other accounts at separate banks. Of course, those accounts were in several different names. One of those rather shady businesses that Cheryl's family was involved with was a gag gift shop where you could buy fake IDs for entertainment purposes only. That was even printed on the ID cards. I possessed an ID claiming I was Jesus Christ, enhancing pranks when sufferers exclaimed, "Jesus Christ." I'd reveal my fake ID, costing about $1.50, skillfully crafted, with the only giveaway being the entertainment statement. For a higher fee, they'd omit the warning. I electronically transferred money to other accounts, potentially traceable but costly and time-consuming. Now, back in front of the man-hating judge, 60 days into my 90-day county jail stay, short-term sentences served in the county jail, not state prison. She sneered and asked if I had learned my lesson yet. I responded, "About not marrying a cheating spouse? I grasped that long before your court." She clarified that she meant my attitude in her court. The vein on her forehead was popping, not ideal for her blood pressure. I dismissed any issues with my attitude, expressing concern about her health while being railroaded in front of kangaroos, and suggested her blood pressure must spike during doctor visits. She warned me that she could extend my stay in jail and, given my attitude, would add another 30 days. She then brought up the purpose of the meeting, questioning why I hadn't made my first 2 child support or maintenance payments to my ex-wife. She also inquired about the absence of my lawyer, questioning if they were OD. In frustration, she expressed her mistaken impression that being really smart was a requirement to be a judge and thanked me for correcting her on that. She suggested explaining things to me so I could understand. Sorry if it's still over your head, but the lowest I can go is so a 5th grader can comprehend it. Do try to keep up. I really was becoming concerned about her bench catching on fire from the flames she was snorting. At that point, I was starting to think that she actually didn't like me. I am in jail. I have no access to any money. Since I have no access to any money, I am unable to send any money since it was your dumb self that put me there. I suggested she explain why she is the reason the cheating woman can't get the money that she was trying to steal from me to give to that fallen woman. I questioned if she got all that or if I needed to explain it to her slower. I was then escorted back to my cell for another 90 days, 30 from my original sentence, 30 from her first tirade, and another 30 that I managed to catch at the end. To be honest, it really wasn't that bad. Sure, the food sucked, but I still ate it. I had a nice bed to sleep in and lots of free time to relax. I made good use of the weights and exercise machines. I didn't have many problems in there. First off, it didn't take too long for my courtroom antics to become common knowledge inside the jail, making me a few friends. Second, did I mention that Cheryl's family has a few connections that could be of help to someone on the inside? In fact, there was only one problem. It came from one of Wanda's less intelligent cousins. He entertained the idea of getting arrested for a minor offense, spending a week in jail to teach me a lesson. Initially, the entire jail population recognized him before he set foot inside. It didn't take much brainpower to discern his intentions. Spotted halfway across the yard, an inmate collided with him while tossing a football. The accidental elbow to his gut occurred, but he continued his quest foolishly. Struck by a basketball after another 20 feet, the passer apologized profusely. An accidental elbow to the chin followed while being helped up. After shaking off the incidents, he resumed his trek toward me, encountering 2 more mishaps before reaching his destination. With my back turned, he attempted a sucker punch, but I wasn't clueless. Anticipating it, I spun around, delivering a forceful kick to his groin, a clear 65-yard field goal. His accumulated misfortunes caught up, leading to his transfer to the infirmary 2 days later. He refused yard exercise, spending most of his time in his cell until released. Back in court, facing the judge, she inquired if I was ready to apologize. I asked, "For?" She specified my vile courtroom outburst. I responded, "I really don't know what you're talking about." Dismissively, she warned me to keep a civil tongue or extend my stay. I expressed frustration, mentioning that another judge might take over and she was on my last nerve. I sarcastically suggested starting to stomp my feet, perhaps needing an EMT in the courtroom if she had a stroke. I pointed out that there was no child support, maintenance, mortgage, or utilities paid as ordered. I explained that I couldn't pay anything while jailed, couldn't work, and emphasized that the kids were not mine. I added that my ex-wife was a cheat and should pay for her own life, maybe charge for it. Addressing another issue, I stated that I had given her half the business and she should have plenty of money. Wanda's lawyer interjected, explaining that they had been unable to take possession of his client's part of the business. Mr. Nielsen had sold his company to an overseas entity about 2 months before filing for divorce, and they hadn't determined the actual owners to address the court order. Suddenly, an attractive woman approached, stating she represented the board of directors for the firm that purchased the business. She moved to dismiss the ruling giving Mrs. Nielsen any part of a business owned by her ex-husband. She argued that it was irregular to award ownership without the business's involvement. Since the purchase predated the divorce, this company had no bearing on the case. They rejected any claim of ownership by Mrs. Nielsen. Someone queried about the money from the sale. The young woman explained, "Regarding Wanda, the transfer of ownership and payments were conducted overseas. I'm not privy to that information, but my understanding is that the money from the purchase never entered U.S. territory, making it not subject to U.S. laws. Any claim on that money needs addressing with your ex-husband, possibly in the country where the money is located." Wanda's lawyer asked, "What country is that?" "The original transfer of funds was in Belgium, but my understanding is that the money was transferred somewhere else shortly after the sale. I have no idea where it was transferred to," the young woman replied. My ex's lawyer spoke up again, expressing desperation on behalf of my ex. The house was going into foreclosure as the mortgage hadn't been paid in 3 months, and the utilities were on the brink of being cut off. It was mentioned that my client's parents had assisted a bit initially, but it was becoming too much for them. Despite finding a job as a waitress at a local diner, the income wasn't sufficient to maintain the house. The judge addressed me, stating that I had 1 week to bring all the payments up to date. I responded sarcastically, suggesting bending over to pull cash out of my crack, which, unfortunately, didn't exist. I emphasized that I was physically unable to comply as I was in jail with no access to any money. I couldn't work due to my incarceration, and thus, I couldn't obtain any cash. I pointed out the misconception that I had money laying around in my cell, and highlighted the lack of opportunity provided to fulfill the payment orders. I explained that I didn't have a lawyer, emphasizing that I was financially broke. I questioned the existence of the phantom accounts being mentioned, stating that even if they did exist, I lacked access information. I pointed out the need for access to my financial records to obtain account details, highlighting the absence of such records. I challenged anyone to show me the account information for these alleged accounts and questioned the whereabouts of the money from checking accounts, savings accounts, and investments. Regarding the sale of my company, I explained that the company was in bad shape due to previous bad investments, and I had to sell it cheap to cover expenses, leaving no money left over. In response to the court's skepticism, I shrugged and expressed my lack of concern about being believed. I challenged them to show me the account information where I supposedly hid money, suggesting that my ex-wife had stolen the money while involved with her boyfriends. Her lawyer objected, stating that my accusation didn't make sense. I retorted, "It makes as much sense as keeping me in jail where I have no access to money, then demand that I make all of these payments you all want." The judge asked if I was aware that she could keep me in jail until I paid. I responded by looking at her as if she had just grown a third eye. I played along, stating that it sounded logical to keep me where I was unable to abide by their orders, while making demands that were simply impossible for me to accomplish. 3 months later, the house underwent foreclosure, leading Wanda to lose her Lexus due to payment challenges. Unable to afford an apartment for herself and her daughters, she resorted to living with her parents while working 30 hours a week at the diner. Desperate, they pleaded with the judge to release me for payment initiation. Loverboy, now out of the hospital and engaged in physical therapy, spent hours daily trying unsuccessfully to resolve his financial situation. The silver lining was the prevention of new credit card accounts being opened in his name, given his severely diminished credit rating. With only minimal insurance coverage on his car and part-time employment at the gym, he couldn't benefit from it and faced high deductibles, making it a lengthy process to pay off his medical bills. Having secured legal representation, I reached a deal with the judge for release from jail to secure employment and initiate payments. Surrendering my passport due to suspicions of hidden funds and flight risk, I began working at Taco Bell and lived at the ranch with Howard and Cheryl. Although discreetly observed, I was aware of the surveillance, yet most of the cash was already in my possession. This routine persisted for the next 3 months. Wanda utilized a court order to garnish my minimum wage from Taco Bell, yielding minimal gains for her. During this time, I finalized my plans, with Howard emptying my apartment while I was in jail. Belongings were divided among my extended family, and packages were shipped from them to a common location. Undetected by surveillance, guests discreetly moved packages to their vehicles during visits and barbecues over the next couple of weeks. I spent my time either working or at home, avoiding going out. Taco Bell eventually obtained a restraining order against Wanda due to constant annoyance at the restaurant, which became disruptive. Despite the option of termination, a discreet payment to the manager preserved my employment. For legal meetings, my lawyer visited the ranch, initially representing the new owners of my former company in court. Subsequently, I hired her as my lawyer. She possessed a bold nature, akin to a barracuda, especially during poolside encounters. Dismissing ethical concerns about a lawyer-client relationship, I asserted that lawyers considered scruples as a form of payment in Russia, with morals being large paintings on walls. All right, so you're probably wondering about my finances. Yes, indeed, I did sell my firm. No, I didn't sell it to myself. I wasn't going to provide Wanda any chance to stumble upon information she could use to claim any part of the firm. I was divesting from it. Besides, I wanted the cash. The sale happened overseas, and since the money never entered the United States jurisdiction, it wasn't subject to any U.S. loss. The only way Wanda could access it was if I brought any of the money into a U.S. bank, making it vulnerable to her claims due to the judgments against me. That simply wasn't going to happen. It was a significant sum, complemented by my investment accounts in the $10 million range. Cash on hand from the safety deposit box, checking and savings accounts, and safes with cash equaled around $200,000. Some of the cash I used for my plans, but I still had about $150,000 on hand. I wasn't planning to take any cash with me. So it was a lovely Saturday afternoon. We were having another barbecue with the extended family. All the preparations were complete and everything was set. The party was a blast. I assisted Howard with the grill and smoker. Julia, my lawyer, was there too. Later in the afternoon, one of Cheryl's uncles approached me, expressing gratitude for helping Cheryl and Howard, and was glad that we had finally reconnected. We chatted, and he handed me an envelope. I passed it over to Julia for safekeeping. Later in the evening, I made an announcement, stating that the lion holder for the ranch had declared that the mortgage for the ranch had been paid off, and Howard and Cheryl now owned the ranch free and clear. This caused a huge celebration. We partied hard that night. It was late when the guests started to leave. Julia couldn't stay the night because she had a flight to catch. The next morning, she left with a group of 6 other cars. Interestingly, her flight was out of an airport in the next state. She had packed previously and had everything in her leased car. When she came to the party, she never went to her rented apartment. Instead, she went straight to the airport. No one witnessed the man climbing out of the back of her car in the parking garage, and no one took notice of the man casually walking 50-50 behind her as they made their way to the international terminal. Michael Nielsen couldn't travel outside the U.S. because he had surrendered his passport to the court. Mitchell Nelson's passport never even garnered a second look. No one even gave a second look as they held hands in adjoining seats, flying first class to Mexico City. Julia Davis suddenly disappeared there. Instead, Jamie Nelson joined Mitchell Nelson for their connecting flight to Ecuador. 2 days later, Greg and Samantha Cooper reached their hacienda on the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica, becoming members of the Mile High Club. Oddly, an old Chevy pickup resembling the one that disappeared from Howard and Cheryl's ranch awaited them. 2 weeks after the barbecue, a bench warrant was issued for Michael Nielsen. He was fired 2 days after the barbecue for no show, no call, with no payments to his ex-wife since. When Howard and Cheryl faced the court, a lawyer in a $5,000 skirt suit argued that the couple had no responsibility towards their cousin, who rented a room and disappeared. They even filed a suit against him for back rent. All they could say was that he drove off in his old pickup one afternoon and never returned. No one believed them, but there was no proof to the contrary. Over the next several years, Greg Cooper ran a small charter fishing boat, and Samantha managed their cantina. They were prosperous in the small village, living in one of the larger haciendas with several luxuries. Guests visited occasionally, including Harold and Cheryl and other family members. It was a simple yet delightful life for Greg and Sam, who loved each other fully. Most evenings, they entertained guests in the cantina or their lavish hacienda. Wealthy and pleasant to all, they were quickly accepted into the community. Whenever a need arose, they generously donated. Greg played the stock markets when not on his boat or in the cantina, even setting up accounts for some locals, assisting them with their finances. As for the dishonorable Judge Marie Matthews, I had a good laugh a few years after escaping to Costa Rica. Judge Matthews' wife, that man-hating woman, was caught cheating with a man. The judge had adopted her wife's 3 kids when they married. Since their split, Judge Matthews paid child support, maintenance, and house payments for her ex-wife. To add to the humiliation, her ex-wife swiftly moved her boyfriend in, publicly continuing their affair. Although not officially married, they acted like a typical couple. Rumors circulated about their wedding date set exactly 1 week after their youngest son graduated from college, coinciding with the end of Judge Matthews' financial obligations.
Story 3.
While grieving at my mother's funeral, my selfish sister-in-law demanded I babysit her 3 kids, leading to a series of shocking events that changed our family forever. My mother was paralyzed from the waist down and had always been suffering from several health issues since the time I can remember. Her condition required constant care and attention, which placed a significant burden on our family. My father worked as a truck driver, so he was often gone for long hours, sometimes even days. Dad and I did everything we could to ensure Mom was comfortable and well cared for. However, his job's demanding nature meant that I had to shoulder a lot of the caregiving duties on my own. We had a nurse who would come to help out occasionally, but it wasn't often enough. We simply didn't have the financial means to hire a full-time caregiver. The times when the nurse was there felt like a relief, but those moments were rare. This left me with the responsibility of taking care of my mom for the majority of the time. Every day after school, I would come home and immediately tend to my mom's needs, whether it was helping her with her physical therapy exercises, preparing her meals, helping her to relieve herself in the bathroom, or just keeping her company. It was a full-time job in itself. There were so many days when I was exhausted and felt like I was missing out on my teenage years. While my friends were out having fun, I was at home ensuring Mom was okay. She was very needy and would not even let me leave her room to watch TV or do my homework. I would have to sit right next to her in bed while finishing up my assignments so that she could feel like she was helping me out in some ways. As you can imagine, by the time I graduated high school, I was utterly exhausted to be at home. The years of balancing schoolwork, caregiving, and trying to maintain some semblance of a social life had taken their toll. I loved my mom dearly and never resented her, but the constant responsibility weighed heavily on me. I was drained physically, emotionally, and mentally. Despite the exhaustion, I knew I had done everything I could to make her life as comfortable as possible, given our circumstances. When it was time for me to choose a college, I deliberately picked the university that was the farthest from home. I knew that if I chose a closer school, I would be drawn back home every weekend to take care of Mom. I felt a profound sense of guilt about my decision, but I also recognized that I needed to prioritize my own survival and mental health. The years of caregiving had left me drained, and I needed a chance to recover and live my own life. My parents were not happy with my choice. My dad, in particular, insisted that I drop out of the university and take a gap year. He wanted me to apply to universities nearby so that I could continue to help take care of Mom. Meanwhile, Mom kept telling me that I could never live without her and that I was abandoning my family in their time of need. I argued back, saying that I had spent my entire life living under their rules and taking on responsibilities that were not typical for someone my age. I told them that it was time for me to get out and live my own life. My dad threatened to cut me off financially if I didn't listen to him. In a moment of anger and frustration, I told him it was time for him to step up and take care of his wife, instead of expecting a child half his age to shoulder the burden. My parents were furious and made their indignation clear. Mom cried for days, pleading with me to reconsider my decision. Up until the day I had to move out, she kept begging me to stay. Her tearful pleas and my dad's stern disapproval weighed heavily on my heart, but I stood my ground, knowing that if I didn't take this step, I would never be able to live my own life or heal from the years of emotional and physical exhaustion. It was one of the hardest decisions I ever had to make, but I knew it was necessary for my own well-being. When I finally moved into my college dorm, it felt surreal. I couldn't believe that I was finally free from the responsibilities that had defined my life for so long. The dorm room, with its simple bed, desk, and closet, symbolized a new chapter. I was overwhelmed with a mix of emotions, relief, excitement, and a touch of sadness for leaving my family behind. During college, I tried my best to stay in touch with my parents. My dad, however, always resented me for leaving. Our conversations were often strained, filled with underlying tension and unspoken accusations. He couldn't understand my need to get away, and he held on to his bitterness. My mom, on the other hand, missed me terribly. Over time, she began to understand that I had no choice but to leave. She realized that I needed this break for my own well-being. Because I had to take care of my mom from such a young age, I made the decision quite early on in my life that I never wanted to have children. And my mind has never changed. My entire childhood and teenage years were spent taking care of an adult, and I felt I didn't have the mental and emotional capacity left in me to take care of anyone else in the future. I was always clear about this choice with every guy I have ever met. For a long time, I chose to remain single rather than date men who, despite knowing my decision to remain child-free, would hope that I would eventually change my mind. When I didn't change my mind, they would get angry, saying how women were supposed to have children and that it was ungodly of me to deny them. Their reactions reinforced my decision to stay single. I refused to let them pressure me into a life I didn't want. And I was determined to find someone who would accept me for who I was without the expectation of motherhood. This is why, when I finally met James, who didn't want children just like me, and instead wanted to travel the world, it felt like a match made in heaven. From the moment we started talking, I knew he was different. James shared my passion for travel and exploration, and also my firm decision not to have children. He told me that he had undergone a vasectomy a long time ago because he was sure he never wanted to be a father. It was such a relief to find someone who was on the same page as me. Besides our shared interest in remaining child-free, James was kind, helpful, and intelligent. His spontaneity matched mine perfectly, and together we could just up and travel anywhere we wished. With James, I've been to over 20 different countries. Our adventures have taken us from the bustling streets of Tokyo to the serene beaches of Greece, and each journey has been an incredible experience. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not rich, and neither do we come from wealthy families. However, because we don't have children and both of us are adaptable adults, we've been able to keep our priorities straight. We prioritize experiences over material possessions, and we live frugally when necessary to save up for our next trip. Our love for travel and our commitment to living a child-free life have brought us closer together. It's a partnership based on mutual understanding and shared dreams, and it has made our life together incredibly fulfilling. Everything with James is great, but I can't say the same about his family. Early on, James warned me that his mother and sister are very difficult to get along with. He shared multiple stories about how these two women have always judged every girl he has ever dated, never really approving of them. Over the years, his family has been consistently judgmental and always had an opinion about his lifestyle. James enjoys being a free spirit, embracing spontaneity and adventure, but his family has always wanted him to settle down and have a traditional job. This clash of values has been a significant source of tension between them. The situation escalated dramatically back when James decided to get a vasectomy. His mother, Vinnie, was furious when she found out. She was so angry that she stormed into his workplace and yelled at him in front of everyone, expressing her shame and disappointment that he did not want to become a father. She told him she was ashamed to have given birth to a son like him. That incident was a turning point for James. The public humiliation and the lack of respect for his personal choices made him realize that he needed to distance himself from his family. Since then, he has reduced his contact with them as much as possible. While he still loves his family, he understands that their constant judgment and disapproval are toxic to his well-being. James's decision to minimize contact has allowed him to live his life more freely, but it also means that there is an undercurrent of tension whenever family matters arise. James's mother did apologize to him several times after the vasectomy incident, which is why eventually he agreed to let me meet her. I was quite well prepared for the encounter, having grown up with pushy parents myself. James's mother, Vinnie, was exactly as I had imagined, short-tempered and very malleable. In our first meeting, she immediately had opinions to share about my red hair color and the tattoo on my forearm. She didn't hold back her judgments, making it clear that she wasn't impressed. When she asked about my parents, I told her about my mother's disability. Vinnie then made a shocking comment, asking if that was why I wanted to marry James, so he could help me take care of my mom. I was taken aback, especially since James hadn't even met my mother at that point. Besides, why would I need to marry a man to take care of my mom? Her ridiculous words made me laugh out loud. Vinnie didn't like that at all and said she found my laughter very insulting. I didn't care and just kept eating my food without apologizing to her. Over the years, our relationship has never improved, but I've never sweated about it. I let her do her thing, and I do mine. Her opinions and judgments don't affect me, and I maintain a polite but distant relationship with her. However, the main villain in my life isn't my mother-in-law, since I can pretty much handle her. It's actually my sister-in-law. She has always hated the fact that I don't want children as much as James. She had always expected her brother to meet a woman who would eventually change his mind and force him into becoming a father. Instead, James met me, who shared his interest in not having kids, and this infuriated her. When she found out that we both wanted to remain child-free, she asked me what the purpose of my life was. I told her that my purpose was to live my life just like every other person, doing the things I wanted to do. However, she argued, questioning the point of God giving me a uterus, as if the sole purpose of a woman is to become a breeding animal. I responded that just because one has a uterus doesn't mean they have to use it, and that people who don't want to have children shouldn't be forced to take on kids they can't manage. Nothing would damage a kid more than having parents who don't know how to take care of them, despite my explanations. Sister-in-law just shook her head and kept telling me how James and I were going to regret our decision when we were older and had no one to take care of us. I quipped back that I didn't want to have children just to have insurance for them to take care of me, as there's no guarantee they ever would. I also mentioned that I would feel much more comfortable at an old-age home with nurses and staff who could take care of me if such a situation ever arose when we were older. Sister-in-law never bothered listening to me. As you can already imagine, over the years, she has done everything in her power to force us to change our minds. It all started with her having children, and then calling us every other weekend to take care of them. Now, James and I love our nephews and niece, but spending time with them for 3 to 4 hours isn't going to change our minds about not wanting kids. Currently, James and I are working hard to build our marketing agency. Even though it has just started, we've already onboarded a few well-paying clients. This time is crucial for us, and we know we have to work very hard to retain them for a long time. At this stage, we also rely heavily on word of mouth from these clients to spread the word that we're a good agency for their brands. Because of this, James and I have been very busy with work and haven't even traveled anywhere. Sister-in-law is well aware of this. However, without ever checking in on us, she will just drop her kids off at our place unannounced. She will give us excuses that she needs a break or has to buy groceries, but will be gone for hours on end. Whenever this happens, James tries to take care of the kids for about an hour before he gets quickly irritated. He then ends up switching on the TV for them and lets them watch whatever they want to. Kids being kids, get quickly bored and want attention, so then they start wailing or fighting amongst themselves, which is when I am forced to leave my work and play with them. I know they're just kids, but due to all of this, I've started to resent them, and I know for a fact that James does too. This situation is frustrating because we are trying to build something important, and every interruption feels like a step backward from our future. Despite my best efforts to maintain a good relationship with my sister-in-law, her constant disregard for our time and work commitments is creating a significant strain. We have had several talks with her, but she just dismisses our feelings, saying her kids are practically related to us by blood and that we should learn to live with them. This is why for the past 2 months, James and I have been escaping to cafes to work just to avoid his sister's unannounced child drop-offs. Whenever she would show up at our place, we'd tell her we were out meeting a client or had an important meeting that day. This way, we knew she couldn't leave the kids with us any longer. Of course, my sister-in-law would get furious that we were unavailable and would demand we come back home, but James would argue back, insisting she needed to watch over her own kids instead of pushing them onto us all the time. Later, my mother-in-law would call James to reprimand him about not helping his sister enough and how difficult it is for her to be a parent of 3. I would encourage James to tell her that if she cared so much about sister-in-law, then she should start taking care of the children herself. This would infuriate mother-in-law even more, as she would then make excuses about being too old and having done more than enough. She would then continue to insist that we were young and needed to be around children. While we respected her perspective, we couldn't compromise on our priorities. The cafes provided us with a sanctuary where we could concentrate on client meetings, strategy sessions, and creative work without the unexpected disruptions that came with sister-in-law's unannounced visits. This strategy has been working well for us for quite some time, and while it hasn't resolved the underlying family tensions, it's given us the space we need to prioritize our work and maintain our sanity. Recently, my mother succumbed to her ongoing illness. When my dad called to deliver the news, I was devastated and completely shattered. Despite the distance that had grown between me and my parents over the years, I still loved my mother deeply, and the realization that she was no longer with us was incredibly painful. James and I immediately booked a car to drive back home, a journey that would typically take 3 to 4 hours depending on traffic. However, just as we were on our way, sister-in-law called James. She informed him that she was exhausted and needed a mental break, asking him to take care of her kids. James explained to her about my mother's passing and expressed his inability to help at that moment. He assured her that after we returned from the funeral, he would be available to watch over the kids so she could have her break. But sister-in-law's response shocked us both. She had the audacity to suggest that we take her kids with us to the funeral. She thought it would be a good idea for them to enjoy a long drive and spend a few days with us. I could hear every word she said because James had her on speakerphone in the car. I was baffled by her insensitivity and rolled my eyes. This was my mother's funeral, for God's sake, not a joyous trip to Disneyland. Her kids had never even met my mom, and the thought of bringing them to an event where people would be grieving was completely inappropriate and disrespectful to everyone, including me. Sister-in-law didn't even bother to ask James about me or how I was doing, yet wanted us to just take her kids off her hands. James again declined her and told her that he was driving, so he would have to call her back later. During my mom's funeral, I received only a couple of texts from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law offering their condolences. I didn't hear from them over the phone, but I wasn't too bothered at that time because my focus was entirely on honoring my mom's memory and supporting my family through this tough period. On the day of the burial, James started receiving numerous missed calls from his mother, which he chose not to answer. Since I had left my phone at home, I couldn't be sure if they had tried to reach out to me as well. When we returned home after the funeral in the afternoon, I was surprised to find several voicemails waiting for me from sister-in-law and mother-in-law. I initially thought they were reaching out to express sympathy for my mother's passing, but to my surprise, there were multiple voicemails demanding that James and I come back immediately to watch over the kids. They explained they wanted to go on a shopping spree, which left me taken aback and hurt as I listened to voicemail after voicemail from both of them insisting on our return. James heard the messages too, and immediately called his sister to confront her about their inappropriate demands. Like me, he was starting to get really frustrated with their insensitivity and selfishness during such a difficult time. We found it incredibly insensitive that they were more concerned about their own plans than understanding the emotional toll losing my mom had on me and James. However, when James finally got in touch with his sister, she informed us that she was already with mother-in-law on the road and they had left her kids at home. She insisted that we needed to drive back to her place immediately, as it had already been 30 minutes since they had left after sending us the last voicemail. James incredulously questioned if she had, in fact, lost her mind, since we had just come back from burying my mother, and there was no way we could drive to her place at the moment. Hearing this in the background, mother-in-law started to yell at him, accusing him of only prioritizing his wife and having no problem driving with me to my mom's funeral. She said he should also prioritize his family and have no issue driving back immediately and taking care of his nephews and niece. James pointed out how they could not just force us to drop everything for the kids, especially when we were still in mourning. However, sister-in-law defended herself, stating that she had left the TV on and provided enough food for the children, so we didn't have to do much for them. But she insisted that we needed to return home as soon as possible because the kids would get hungry soon. My eyes widened in shock as I started to realize that she sounded quite serious. As a result, my husband and I decided to drive to her home, even though we were exhausted. We called sister-in-law several times throughout our drive, but she let our calls go to voicemail each time. We kept hoping and praying that she was probably pranking us, and that she would not actually abandon her own children. When we finally arrived at her place, our worst fears were tragically confirmed. We entered her living room to find all her 3 kids in a state of distress, hungry, crying, and visibly shaken. The sight of their tear-streaked faces and desperate cries tore at our hearts. It was clear they had been left alone for far too long and looked very relieved to see us there. Immediately, we rushed to comfort them, providing food and soothing words as we assessed the situation. Guilt and anger surged within us. How could sister-in-law have been so reckless, so indifferent to her own children's well-being? However, to our further horror, we discovered James's niece in distress, as she had half a crayon stuck in her nose. She was apparently playing around with crayons and was now struggling to breathe properly. We had no idea how long she had the crayon up in her nose, so we immediately dialed, explaining the urgent situation. We also had to explain how sister-in-law had abandoned her children, leading to their critical condition since we didn't want to be implicated in this incident. The ambulance and police arrived swiftly, and we recounted the events. We informed them about how we were at my mother's funeral, and then had to rush back home after sister-in-law had already left the kids all on their own. Eventually, CPS was notified, and by then, we knew this was a serious matter. Later, when sister-in-law and mother-in-law arrived, seemingly oblivious to the severity of the situation, carrying multiple shopping bags, they were shocked to see police and CPS personnel speaking with us. Sister-in-law erupted in anger, accusing us of betraying her and attempting to harm the custody rights of her children. She tried to explain how she had left the kids at the safety of her home and that she knew me and my husband would drive back home immediately, so her kids were never actually in any real danger. Fortunately, CPS and the police didn't agree with her. Following these events, sister-in-law has been arrested for abandonment, and the children have been put under our care temporarily since their father lives in another country and will take some time to fly back home. Mother-in-law is furious at James and me for involving the authorities and has threatened legal action against us. According to her, we have mentally harassed and endangered her daughter by getting her arrested for no reason, as this could lead to sister-in-law losing custody rights permanently. Are we the a-holes for reporting sister-in-law and possibly ruining her life? Update 1. Okay, so instead of repeating myself in the comments, I'm going to clear up a few things here. James's father passed away when he was quite young. This is why mother-in-law and sister-in-law have always been so involved in his life, as they both feel they have practically raised him together. Obviously, that's not true because, according to James, his mother and sister used to abandon him as a child all the time to do their own thing, so he learned to pretty much take care of himself all on his own. This is also the #1 reason why he has never wanted to have kids after watching his mother be such a terrible parent to him and his sister. My husband does stand up to them all the time, but they just refuse to take no for an answer. Sister-in-law and her ex-husband are divorced. Her ex currently lives in another country for his job, but he's flying back soon to take on the responsibility of the kids. He does pay child support every month, as well as had to pay a hefty alimony during his divorce, which is how sister-in-law can afford to live a lavish lifestyle without a job. Since the court generally lets mothers have full primary custody of the children, they have been living with sister-in-law as a result. And the father comes and visits the kids every other month. I don't think he had any idea that his wife would regularly abandon their kids at our place because we have never talked to him. But we are planning to have a sit-down with him when he arrives and let him know everything that has been going on. As of now, the kids are doing okay with us. They don't look traumatized, and we are doing our best to take care of them as much as we can. Unfortunately, James and I don't think we can take care of the children permanently in the future. We are not equipped to take on this responsibility, and we are grateful that their father will be arriving soon. Yes, mother-in-law is still threatening to take us to court. However, after reading all your comments, I feel much better knowing that she doesn't really have any legal grounds to stand on. As usual, she's just probably trying to intimidate us and refusing to accept her own role in encouraging sister-in-law to abandon her kids that day. Update 2. So, sister-in-law has been released on bail currently, thanks to her lawyer. However, this arrest is going to seriously affect her upcoming custodial fight with her ex-husband. Her ex did come to meet me and James. He thanked us for everything and told us that he had no idea about how sister-in-law had been treating their kids. He assured us that he would take his kids away from sister-in-law no matter what, to prevent them from ever suffering again. The ex seems quite well off, so I'm sure he can hire nannies to care for the children at his place, which is a far better option than what sister-in-law does. The only thing sister-in-law won't like about this arrangement is losing child support, which she depends on to maintain her lifestyle. We have blocked mother-in-law after sending her a long text message in which we firmly expressed that we wanted nothing to do with her whatsoever, and that she shares 100% responsibility with sister-in-law for abandoning the kids in that state. We further informed her that we were done with her narcissistic behavior, and if she ever approached us again, we wouldn't hesitate to get a restraining order against her. We are hoping this makes her stop contacting us ever again in the future. Update 3. I know it's been several months since I last updated, but I wanted to come here and give a final update about sister-in-law. It turns out she lost custody, and the judge rightfully let the father take full custody of the children. Sister-in-law's neglect and abandonment of the kids were crucial factors in the court's decision. During the custody battle, several witnesses, including us, testified about the conditions we found the children in and sister-in-law's irresponsible behavior. I also testified about the multiple times sister-in-law would drop off her kids at our place and practically force us to take care of them. In the end, the judge deemed it in the best interest of the children to be under their father's care, given his stable situation and commitment to providing a safe, nurturing environment. On the day of the court ruling, sister-in-law told me and James that we had no right to involve the authorities and that all we had to do was keep our mouths shut and take her children to the hospital if one of them needed any medical attention. She called me several insulting words and accused me of being jealous of her. James told her that this was probably the last time we would ever be in the same room together and threatened to take legal action against her, just like we had given the same warning to mother-in-law. Fortunately, over the past few months, the children have adjusted well to their new living arrangements with their father. They are finally surrounded by the love and support they deserve. We video call the kids every weekend. James and I are very relieved that they are now in a stable, caring environment, free from the neglect they experienced before. As for everyone asking about my dad, he's doing okay. Since my mother's passing, I've been reconnecting with him more often. It's been a process of healing and rebuilding our relationship during this difficult time.
Story 4.
The summer I turned 8 was when I first realized how deeply I valued connection. My family had just moved to a quiet suburban neighborhood, and making friends didn't come naturally to me. One day, a baseball rolled into our yard, and behind it came Kenny, a wiry kid with an infectious grin. He didn't ask if I wanted to play, he simply handed me the bat. That moment sparked a lifelong friendship. By middle school, Don had joined our circle. He was the brains of the group, always coming up with elaborate plans for our adventures. Whether it was building tree houses or sneaking into the local swimming pool after dark, Don's schemes rarely failed. The three of us became inseparable, navigating the ups and downs of adolescence as a unit. High school brought its challenges. Kenny's parents divorced, leaving him struggling to find stability. Don, ever resourceful, kept us grounded by organizing study groups and football practices. We weren't just friends, we were brothers, forging a bond that weathered every storm. It was during these years that I met Becky, a quiet girl who seemed drawn to our chaotic energy. She eventually became my anchor, balancing out my impulsive tendencies. College saw us scattered geographically but not emotionally. Kenny pursued engineering, Don law, and I business. Our paths diverged, but we made a pact. No matter how busy life became, we'd always make time for an annual trip. A tradition that started with fishing weekends and grew into something sacred. These trips weren't just about relaxation. They were a reminder of who we were before careers and families reshaped our lives. As adulthood settled in, our group expanded to include our spouses. Becky fit seamlessly, her wit and warmth adding a new dimension to our gatherings. The trips evolved, becoming a blend of adventure and family bonding. But over time, subtle shifts began to surface. Missed gatherings, strained conversations. The ease we once shared started to fray at the edges. Looking back, I can see the signs that things weren't as solid as they seemed. Becky's laughter at Kenny's jokes grew quieter, Don's clever remarks felt more barbed, and my own enthusiasm waned. Yet I clung to the hope that our next trip, this trip, would reignite the spark we once had. That hope is what kept me packing my bags, even as doubt clouded my mind. So as I stood there, ready to leave, I thought about the memories we'd built and the ones we'd yet to create. I told myself this trip was a chance to reclaim the joy and camaraderie that had defined so much of my life. Little did I know it would unravel more than I ever expected. The trip was supposed to be an escape, a break from the grind and a chance to recharge with old friends. I'd meticulously prepared for this week-long fishing retreat, packing gear and supplies with anticipation. Yet as I zipped up my last bag, a nagging sense of unease took root. These trips, once filled with laughter and camaraderie, now carried an unfamiliar weight. Over the years, my friends and I had shared countless adventures, building a bond as solid as family. But this time, something felt different. Off even. Originally, the plan included everyone, our close-knit group of 3 men and our wives, but one by one, the pieces began to fall apart. Kenny couldn't join us until later in the week due to a critical business obligation, which meant his wife Pam stayed home. Then Don's work commitments forced him to cut his trip short, and his wife followed suit. When my wife Becky learned she'd be the only spouse attending, she opted out as well. What was meant to be a lively, collective getaway now felt like a shadow of its potential, leaving me disheartened and questioning the point of it all. When my wife Becky found out that none of the other wives would be coming, she opted out too. The trip wasn't shaping up to be the fun, lively getaway we were used to, and it left me feeling disappointed. Normally, these trips were a chance for all of us to bond and unwind together. Honestly, I often looked forward to them not just for the camaraderie, but because they sparked some of the most passionate moments in my marriage. Before, during, and after these getaways, Becky and I always seemed to connect in ways that reignited the spark between us. The idea of missing out on that was more upsetting than skipping time with my friends. That said, Becky and I had been particularly active in the days leading up to the trip. We'd been so intimate, it was almost exhausting. At times, I just wanted to sleep, but she kept initiating, and I wasn't about to complain. It was our usual routine before I went away, and I enjoyed it. However, for the rest of the year, our bed life often felt stale. Sure, we were still intimate, but it was maybe twice a week at best, and it felt more like a routine than a genuine connection. It was a far cry from the early days of our marriage when any opportunity or quiet corner seemed like the perfect place to be together. Over time, things had gradually shifted, but about 5 years ago, the changes became undeniable. What had once been a passionate, frequent connection dwindled to just a couple of times a week. Often, when I wanted to be close, Becky would turn me down. At first, I'd get frustrated, but after a few arguments, I stopped pushing. If she refused enough times, I'd just deal with my feelings on my own. That Thursday night, I found myself back in that same position. I was in my office, taking a break from packing, nursing a beer. Becky was upstairs putting the kids to bed. I heard her head downstairs to the kitchen, and after a few minutes, she walked into the living room with a glass of wine. She sat down across from me, her face serious. "Honey," she began, her voice hesitant, "I need to talk to you about something important." The tone in her voice set me on edge. "What is it?" I asked. "Please promise me you'll let me say everything before you react," she said, her voice trembling. I know this is going to upset you, but I can't keep it bottled up anymore. I've been scared to tell you, but I have to. My stomach churned. Becky looked both frightened and determined, and I knew whatever was coming would change everything. She took a deep breath and a long sip of her wine before continuing. I know you've been unhappy with our bed life lately. I haven't been satisfied either. I love you, Dave, but you just don't excite me anymore. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, speechless. And David, she went on, I want us to stay married. You're an amazing dad, a great provider, and my best friend. But I need more than what we have in the bedroom. Anger bubbled up inside me, but before I could say a word, she raised her hand to stop me. You promised to let me finish, she said sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to stay silent. I've met someone, she confessed, her voice trembling. Someone I've known for a while. He makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. I can't go on pretending anymore. I've decided to be with him, to be intimate with him. I didn't want to hide this from you because I still care about you, but you need to understand, I can't keep going through the motions with you when I feel nothing. I shot out of my chair, my anger exploding. You're cheating on me. Are you kidding me? How could you do this? Becky stood her ground, stepping in front of me and pushing me back down. Sit down, David, she snapped. I told you this would be hard to hear, but you promised to listen. I sank back into my chair, stunned. I have already spoken with Don about the divorce laws here, she said coldly. You can't afford to leave me. If you try, the court will award me the house, custody of the kids, and 2/3 of your income for alimony and child support. You'd walk away with half the savings and your retirement, but it wouldn't be enough for you to live comfortably. For your own sake and for the kids, you need to accept this. Her words felt like a sledgehammer. She softened slightly as she continued. I still care about you, David. I'll let you be with me sometimes, and we don't have to change anything else about our life, but I'm going to be with him. Sometimes I'll stay out all night, or we might go on trips together. You just have to learn to live with it. I sat there, paralyzed, as my world crumbled around me. My mind was spinning as I tried to absorb everything Becky had said. A storm of emotions, anger, despair, and a sense of powerlessness raged inside me, leaving me frozen and speechless. Becky got up and moved back to her chair, sitting with an unsettling calmness. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Finally, I said, You're nothing but a cheating liar. I thought I knew you. I thought you loved me. But now you're just shattering my heart. How long has this been going on, and who is this guy? Her eyes narrowed, and her tone turned icy. Throwing insults won't help you, David. You'd better let go of your little grudge and start adapting. As for how long or who, that's none of your business, and don't even think about digging into it, because if you do, you'll regret it. She crossed her arms and continued, her voice eerily composed. I've had a lover for a while now. Hiding it was exhausting, constantly sneaking around, making sure there was no trace for you to find. I finally decided it was time to be honest. I'm tired of rushing home to clean up or pretending everything's fine. I'm done with the lies. This way you know what's happening, and I can take time for myself while you look after the kids. Her words cut like a knife, but she wasn't finished. And no, I won't tell you who it is. If I did, you'd probably lose your temper and do something stupid, and then you'd end up in jail or the hospital. Either way, it'd be bad for all of us, especially the kids. They need their father, and I need you working to support this family. So don't even think about trying to interfere. If you do, there will be consequences. I've made sure of that. The confidence in her voice was chilling. She had clearly rehearsed this moment, preparing for every reaction I might have. Her composure only made my anger burn hotter. Well, I finally managed, frustration spilling into my voice. I guess I'll call the guys and tell them I'm skipping the damn trip. We need to talk about this, and I've got a lot to figure out. I reached for my phone, but Becky grabbed my arm. No, she said firmly, meeting my gaze with unflinching determination. You're going on this trip. The kids will stay with your parents as planned. I'm not staying here alone while you sulk around trying to figure out who I'm seeing. You need this time away to come to terms with everything. And trust me, you don't want to know what will happen if you refuse. I've already made sure you won't like the consequences. Her tone was cold, calculated, and left no room for argument. I've got people who can keep tabs on everything. If you try to disrupt my life or find out more than I've told you, it'll get back to me. You just need to accept that this is the way things are now. If you don't fight me on this, I'll make sure your life stays intact. But don't make waves." She walked over to the desk and pulled a thick envelope from the drawer, handing it to me. "Here, just so you know I'm serious. Inside is a detailed account of everything you've done over the past month. Read it, and you'll see how closely I've been watching. If you try to mess with me, I'll know, and I'll make sure you regret it." Then she stood and turned toward the stairs. "I'm going to bed now. If you want to join me, you know where to find me. Nothing has to change unless you force it to." I sat there, stunned and trying to comprehend what had just happened. Who was this woman? What had she done to the person I thought I married? As she walked upstairs, her deliberate, confident sway didn't stir the feelings it once had. Instead, it left me cold. After a moment, I opened the envelope. Inside was a meticulous report chronicling my every move for the past month. It was shockingly detailed, even including things I'd barely noticed myself, like the time I spilled coffee on my shirt at lunch or glanced at a woman on the street. It felt invasive, almost surreal. Gathering this kind of information must have cost a fortune. Was she involved with someone powerful, a millionaire, or worse, someone dangerous? It took me 2 hours to read through everything. By the time I was done, I was shaken to my core. This wasn't just surveillance, it was control. Even things I thought were private had been laid bare. I felt violated, like my entire life had been infiltrated. As I sat there, my thoughts turned to revenge. I couldn't let her destroy my life like this. I needed a plan, a way to take back control without tipping her off. But who could I trust? My friends had always been there for me, but now I wasn't so sure. Could one of them be the man she was seeing? If I confided in the wrong person, I might ruin any chance I had of coming out ahead. Just then, Becky's voice interrupted my thoughts. "David," she called from the top of the stairs, her tone sharp and impatient. "Are you coming to bed, or are you just going to sit there brooding all night? I'm not waiting forever." Her words hung in the air as I sat frozen, consumed by anger and disbelief. My life had just been turned upside down, and I didn't know how to put it back together. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let her win without a fight. She turned and disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me sitting there, my thoughts spiraling out of control. I didn't join her. Instead, I spent the night on the office couch, unable to sleep. At dawn, Becky barged in, waking me up as she started preparing breakfast. Her irritation was evident, and she wasted no time letting me have it. "Get up, Dave," she barked. "Pull yourself together and get ready for work before the kids notice you didn't sleep in our room. When you get back in 2 weeks, I expect you to act like everything's normal. You already know the consequences if you try to disrupt our family. I'm willing to meet your needs occasionally, but you better hold up your end of the deal. And let me be clear, if you even think about finding someone else, I'll divorce you on the spot." Anger bubbled up inside me, and I couldn't hold it back. "Are you serious?" I shouted. "You expect me to just accept this? You get to cheat and bully me into silence, but I can't even consider moving on? How is that fair?" Becky smirked, her tone icy. "Oh, come on, Dave. You're getting plenty from me to keep you satisfied, and we both know it. If you step out, it'll only be out of spite, and that's pathetic. The only reason I'd ever end this marriage is because you can't handle your responsibilities. If you'd been able to give me what I needed, none of this would have happened. So don't start playing the sufferer now." I stammered, the words catching in my throat as my anger turned to disbelief. "I can't believe this," I finally managed. "Not once did you tell me you needed more or wanted something different. You never even hinted that something was wrong. How was I supposed to know? I've always made sure you were satisfied. Hell, more often than not, you had multiple climaxes, and now you're saying it wasn't enough? How could I know if you never told me?" Her expression was unreadable as she replied coldly, "If you're asking that now, it's too late. You've been in the dark for years, Dave. The truth is, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. You've never really known how to please me. I waited, but eventually I realized you never would. So I found someone who could." She turned toward the door, tossing over her shoulder. "Now stop whining and get dressed. I've had enough of this conversation." Still reeling, I stumbled upstairs to get ready for the day. Breakfast was tense, the silence broken only when Sean, our son, looked up and asked, "What's going on?" I started to answer, but Becky cut in smoothly. "Your dad's just worried about something at work," she said with a practiced smile. "He'll be fine after the holidays." Her gaze flicked to me briefly before she returned to her meal. When I got to work, I decided to cancel the fishing trip. ignoring Becky's demand that I go. I was supposed to meet the guys at Denny's after work to load up the gear and head out. Roger was riding with me, and Don planned to drive separately since he'd have to leave midweek. I called Roger to explain. "Hey, something came up and I can't make it. You can take my truck for the gear." But Roger cut me off. "Not happening, Dave," he said firmly. "I just talked to Becky. She told me you might try to back out and said you've been under a lot of stress. She even checked with your office to make sure you didn't have any pressing work. I promised her I'd make sure you went. If I have to drag you there myself, I will. You're coming, and that's final." My stomach twisted with unease. Was Roger involved? Becky had said she'd be gone for the weekend, but Roger was coming with me. Then again, Kenny was staying home until midweek. Could it be him or someone else entirely? I was trapped, and I needed a plan. But Becky and her network were watching my every move. Credit cards, phone calls, even cash withdrawals. Anything out of the ordinary would raise alarms. As I sat at my desk, lost in thought, my phone buzzed. It was Becky, and her tone was sharp the moment I answered. "David, I told you to go on this trip," she said curtly. "Roger just called and said you tried to bail. Let me be clear, this is your final warning. Push me again and you'll regret it. You'll lose everything, including the kids. Do I make myself clear?" The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me shaken. That evening, I met the guys at Denny's as planned. While they laughed and joked, I sat quietly, brooding. Finally, Don turned to me. "What's up with you, man?" I hesitated, then muttered, "Becky's got some crazy idea in her head, and I don't know how to handle it. If she's serious, my marriage is over." Roger exchanged a glance with Don. "Man, Becky called me this morning," Roger said. "She told me you've been under a lot of stress and might try to cancel. She asked me to make sure you came, said you needed this trip to clear your head." Don nodded in agreement. "Yeah, you've been off lately, not yourself. A change of scenery will do you good. Don't worry, I've got plenty of beer and whiskey in the car," he added with a grin. Nothing ever stopped us from having a good time at the cabin. Besides, without the wives, it's just more booze and bigger lies. Feeling cornered, I followed them out to the car. The drive to the stream was quiet, and by the time we arrived 2 hours later, I was already dreading the days ahead. But for now, I poured myself a drink and tried to push the chaos out of my mind. The following morning, both Don and Roger were eager to get to the river, so we left the cabin early. For a few hours, I managed to push the chaos of the past few days out of my mind. The rhythm of casting my line and the quiet of the water provided some much-needed distraction. But as we made our way back to the cabin, my thoughts drifted back to Becky. I couldn't wrap my head around everything she'd said. Could she really have meant it all? Her cold, calculated delivery left little room for doubt. What the hell was I supposed to do now? That night, instead of focusing on the mess I needed to sort out, I let Don and Roger convince me to have a few drinks after dinner. We sat around the cabin, swapping old stories and laughing, but my heart wasn't in it. I was lost in my thoughts, replaying Becky's words over and over, until Don interrupted me. "All right, Dave," he said, leaning forward. "You've been sitting there looking like you've lost your best friend. What's going on? Spill it." For a moment, I hesitated, but then I thought, what's the point of keeping this to myself? If anyone could help me make sense of it, it was these two. We'd been through everything together since we were kids. If I couldn't trust them, who could I trust? So I laid it all out, how things with Becky had been falling apart, how our closeness had been dwindling for years, and finally what she had confessed on Thursday night. I didn't hold back, recounting every word and every threat she had thrown at me. When I finished, Don leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of disbelief and concern. "Dave, are you sure you've got this right?" he asked. "We've known Becky for years. This just doesn't sound like her. She's always been, well, kind, supportive, loyal." "I know," I said, shaking my head. "But that's exactly what she said, Don. I wish I was making it up." Don sighed deeply, rubbing the back of his neck. "Man, if she really said all that, you've got some tough choices ahead. She's not wrong about some of it, though. If you try to leave, it'll be a disaster. Splitting up would tear the kids apart. And we both know the courts almost always favor the mom in custody cases. Unless you can prove Becky's unfit, you're not getting full custody. Even then, you'd still be paying child support, medical bills, and college expenses." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "And then, there's alimony. Since Becky doesn't work, you'd be on the hook for that until she remarries, if she ever does. You'd probably lose the house, too, or have to sell it and split what's left. Same with your savings and retirement. Divorce would leave you with barely enough to scrape by. Hearing this from Don, a lawyer, made it even harder to swallow. I sat in stunned silence as he continued. And Dave, you can't go after her lover. If you do, and something happens, you'll be the one in trouble. Becky could report you, and if her lover presses charges, you'd be facing serious criminal penalties. As your friend, I get it. I'd want to do the same thing. But as your lawyer, I have to tell you not to. The best advice I can give you is to let it go. Keep things as normal as possible and hope Becky eventually changes her mind. I stared at him in disbelief. Don, how can you even say that? If Shelley did something like this to you, would you just let it slide? Would you let her humiliate you like that? Don looked uncomfortable. No, he admitted. I'd be just as pissed as you are. But Shelley wouldn't do that. She knows what we have is good, and she'd never risk it. Becky's got you in a corner, Dave, and fighting back might only make things worse. Roger chimed in then, his voice unusually serious. Dave, listen, from what you've told us, Becky's got eyes everywhere. If you try to dig into her business, she'll know. Hell, she might already know we're having this conversation. You need to tread carefully. My stomach dropped. Crap, I muttered. I didn't even think about that. Roger grinned, his usual humor returning. Well, if you're already screwed, you might as well have another drink. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, unable to sleep. I grabbed my gear and headed upstream to my favorite fishing spot, hoping the solitude would clear my mind. Just as I started casting, my phone buzzed. I was surprised it had a signal out here. When I saw Becky's name on the screen, I hesitated before letting it go to voicemail. Later, I listened to the message. Becky's voice was calm, almost too composed. Hey, honey. I heard you got some good advice from Don last night. I hope you're planning to follow it. You're a great provider and father, and I don't want to lose that. But if you do something reckless, I'll take the kids and leave. Now go have some fun. I stared at the phone, stunned. How the hell did she know what we talked about? There was no cell service at the cabin, and we didn't have a landline. Was my gear bugged? A wave of dread hit me as I realized how deep this went. If she was monitoring me this closely, what else had she done? Unbeknownst to me, Don and Roger were watching from a distance. As I stared at my phone, they exchanged smirks. Think it's working? Roger asked, chuckling. Don shrugged. Let's keep it going for a while. If we play it right, Becky gets what she wants and we stay in her good graces. She'll do whatever it takes to keep this arrangement going. And if Dave ever catches on, we'll spin it like we're just helping him out. Roger laughed. Works for me. And hey, maybe we'll even get her to loosen up on the time constraints. Imagine how much more fun this could be. Meanwhile, I stayed at the river until almost noon, my mind churning. I couldn't stop wondering who Becky was seeing, how long it had been going on, and why she'd betrayed me. I wanted answers, I wanted revenge, and most of all, I wanted this nightmare to end. On Friday evening, Becky sat on the couch, unable to hide her excitement. She glanced at the man beside her, her anticipation evident. The day had been a long tease, and now she was eager for what was about to unfold. I've been waiting all day for this, she said, her voice low and suggestive. I can't wait for the others to get here. Isn't Don supposed to arrive early Wednesday? Yeah, he'll be here, the man replied with a sly grin. Then you'll have the two of us for 2 full nights before I have to go babysit your dear husband. Becky's lips curled into a wicked smile. It's going to be amazing when all 3 of us can be together at the same time. I'm tired of juggling just 1 or at most 2 of you. After everything you've shown me, Dave could never satisfy me again. The man laughed. You think we've covered all our bases? I hope so, she said, her tone softening slightly. I still care about Dave. He's a great dad and a steady provider. I don't want to lose that. Don't worry, he said confidently. We've planned this out carefully. The only thing that could mess it up is if Dave starts sniffing around and talking to our wives. We've had a good thing going for 3 years. Honestly, we probably should have left well enough alone instead of getting greedy. Becky raised an eyebrow. Greedy? You're the one who kept pushing for more time with me. Don't try to pin this on me. The man chuckled. Fair enough. I can't deny I wanted more. Spending entire nights or even trips with you is hard to resist. But we might have underestimated Dave. He's more stubborn than we thought. Well, Becky said with a sigh, the leverage we have on him should keep him in line. And tracking his finances has been effective so far. The bank's put limits on his cash withdrawals, but I can't block him from writing checks. At least we can trace those, he replied with a nod. Still, maybe pushing him to stay home with the kids wasn't the smartest move. We should have left his office alone, Becky giggled. If I hadn't stayed home, we wouldn't be enjoying all this, would we? A couple of evenings a month with you wasn't enough. Now, thanks to our little plan, I get as much as I want. Meanwhile, at the river, Dave sat sullen and distracted. His friends tried to lift his spirits, but nothing seemed to work. Finally, they resorted to getting him drunk. Late Tuesday night, after Dave passed out, Don and Roger stepped outside to talk. I'm starting to worry, Roger said, frowning. Dave's not backing down. He's more determined than ever to leave Becky and go after her lover. If he snaps, how do we contain this? What started as a way to keep him in line is backfiring. Don sighed, running a hand through his hair. Relax. If it comes to it, I'll help Becky with the divorce and make sure she comes out looking innocent. Worst case, they split, and we still keep seeing her. Sure, it's fun while she's married, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. Roger looked uneasy. But what if he figures out what's going on and tells our wives? We'll deal with it if it happens, Don said flatly. If push comes to shove, we might need to apply some pressure. Let's see how the next week goes before we overreact. Inside, Dave stirred, catching fragments of their conversation. Though the words were muffled, he picked up enough to piece together their intentions. His anger simmered as the realization set in. Becky's betrayal wasn't just her doing. His supposed friends were complicit. Before drifting back into a fitful sleep, he resolved to handle things his own way. Over the next few days, Dave withdrew further, speaking less and keeping his plans to himself. When Roger or Kenny pressed him, all he muttered was, I'm going to find out who's behind this and they'll regret it. Finally, the trip ended. Roger rode silently with Dave on the drive back while Kenny followed in his car. Once they reached an area with cell service, Kenny called Don. Don and Becky were sitting in Dave's living room when Kenny's call came through. He's angrier than ever, Kenny reported. If anything, this trip just fueled his resolve. We need to dial things back for now. If he uncovers too much, it'll blow up in our faces. Becky's face paled as she listened, tears welling in her eyes. Her breathing grew unsteady, and Don reached over to comfort her, his expression hardening. Becky, he said firmly, don't worry. If he doesn't calm down, we'll take action. On Monday, we'll file for divorce if necessary. I can freeze his accounts, personal and business. We'll argue he might try to hide assets or sabotage his own company. The courts will side with us. Becky nodded, her voice trembling. I just didn't expect him to fight back like this. Don tightened his grip on her hand. It'll be fine. We'll keep control. Dave won't know what hit him. That Friday night, Dave stepped into his house to find Becky lounging on the couch. Her eyes were puffy and red as if she'd been crying, but her relaxed demeanor told a different story. She was wearing one of his shirts and nothing else. As he passed, he noticed subtle but unmistakable signs that she had been with someone else recently. A wave of rage surged through him. Becky met his glare with a defiant expression, as if daring him to speak. Dave clenched his fists but walked past her without saying a word. Becky trailed him into the bedroom. When he stepped into the shower, she tried to join him, but he shoved her away. Get the hell out, he snapped. I thought we might be able to work through this, but seeing you like this makes it clear. You've gone too far. You might destroy me, but I swear I'll make you and your lover, or lovers, pay for this. After finishing his shower, Dave began packing everything he could fit into his truck. Becky stayed in the living room, speaking calmly on the phone as he moved back and forth between the bedroom and the driveway. Her unbothered tone only stoked his anger. Before leaving, Dave tried to access their joint bank accounts using the computer, but he was locked out. The password had been changed. His jaw tightened as he turned to see Becky standing in the doorway, her face unreadable. I hoped you'd come to your senses before it came to this, she said, her voice laced with regret. You're making a huge mistake, Dave. I love you more than anyone I've ever known. But if you keep acting like this, you'll ruin everything, including the business. For your information, I've hired Don as my lawyer. He's already been briefed about your behavior, and he'll be in touch soon. Dave froze, stunned. Don, his closest friend since college, had sided with Becky? His disbelief quickly turned to fury, but he held his tongue. Without another word, he stormed out of the house, his mind racing. He drove to his office complex, deciding to stay there for the time being. At the security gate, he stopped to speak with the guard. Listen, he said firmly. I'm dealing with a personal situation. My wife and her accomplice have been threatening me. I need you to increase security and make sure no unauthorized people come onto the property. The guard nodded, and Dave drove in. The next morning, as he was leaving the complex to grab breakfast, a man approached him at the gate. "Are you Dave?" the man asked. "Yes," Dave replied, wary. "You've been served," the man said, handing him an envelope before walking away. Dave opened it to find a restraining order. He was barred from coming within 100 yards of Becky, their children, or their home. Additionally, the order required court approval for any transactions involving his personal or business accounts, effectively freezing his access to funds. A court date for the divorce case was set for Monday. Shaken, Dave decided to visit his assistant Gertrude for help. When she opened the door, her face filled with concern. "Dave, you look awful. What's going on?" she asked. "I need someone to talk to," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know who else to turn to." "Come in," Gertrude said, stepping aside. "Do you want some coffee?" Dave followed her to the kitchen, where her husband Thaddeus was sitting at the table with plates of eggs and toast in front of him. "Sorry to interrupt," Dave said awkwardly, taking a step back. "I shouldn't have come. I'll leave you to your morning." Thaddeus glanced up, his expression serious. "You look like you're at the end of your rope, Dave. Sit down. Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out." Reluctantly, Dave sat and began to recount everything: the restraining order, the frozen accounts, and Don's betrayal. He detailed Becky's actions over the past 2 weeks and how his so-called friends had been trying to manipulate him into accepting her affair. "I can't even buy breakfast," he admitted, his voice shaking. "All my credit cards are frozen. I'm trapped, and everyone I thought I could trust has turned against me." Gertrude leaned back, visibly shaken. "I can't believe Becky would do this to you," she said softly. She looked at her husband. "Thad, we have to help him. He can stay here, and we can lend him some money to get through this." Thaddeus nodded. "Absolutely." Dave buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by anger and helplessness. Thaddeus studied him for a moment, then spoke decisively. "First, we need to make sure you're not being monitored," he said. "Strip down and hand me your clothes." Dave blinked, confused. "What?" "You heard me," Thaddeus replied. "Go shower. I'll get you something clean to wear, and I'll check your clothes for bugs." Feeling ridiculous but desperate, Dave complied. After changing into a set of Thaddeus's old clothes, he rejoined them in the basement. They gathered in a small, windowless storage room where Thaddeus had set up a makeshift workspace. "We need to act carefully," Thaddeus said. "If Becky's tracking you, we can't leave a trail. I'll reach out to a few people I know who can help. You'll stay under the radar, and I'll handle the communication." Gertrude handed Dave a stack of cash. "This should help you get started," she said gently. "We'll figure this out, Dave." For the first time in days, Dave felt a glimmer of hope. As they sat together, making plans, he vowed to fight back. Whatever it took, he wasn't going to let Becky or anyone else control him any longer. On Sunday afternoon, Becky, Don, Kenny, and Roger gathered at Becky's house. The morning had been a hedonistic escape, but now they sat in the living room, their conversation shifting to more pressing matters. "This whole situation is making me nervous," Roger admitted, lighting a cigarette. "We've been working on this plan for years, and now it feels like it's spiraling out of control. Dave isn't falling in line, and if he figures everything out, it'll blow up in our faces. Maybe we should back off for a while." "Stop panicking," Don snapped. "Dave's stuck. He can't touch his money, and we're keeping a close eye on him. We'll know what he's planning before he even makes a move." Kenny frowned. "What about yesterday? He spent hours at his secretary's house with her husband. We didn't hear anything from them. What if they're helping him?" "It doesn't matter," Don said dismissively. "We've got all the leverage we need. He's boxed in." As the group's attention shifted back to their indulgent behavior, they failed to notice a man standing outside the window. He held a camera and microphone aimed directly at them, silently capturing every word. The next morning, Dave began the difficult process of finding a new lawyer. He made several calls and arranged interviews with 2 attorneys. The betrayal by Don, who had handled all his legal affairs for years and was now representing Becky, left him feeling lost and unsure of who he could trust. After careful consideration, Dave chose to work with Sally Hawk, a well-regarded attorney with a reputation for being both sharp and compassionate. During their first meeting, Sally quickly mapped out a plan. Step 1 was to petition the court to unfreeze Dave's business accounts to ensure he could maintain his livelihood. She also recommended hiring a private investigator to monitor Becky's activities. Dave approved wiretapping and video surveillance at his home to gather evidence. Sally then filed for divorce on grounds of infidelity, setting the legal process in motion. Later that evening, Tad, Gertrude's husband, handed Dave a USB drive containing footage he had recorded over the weekend. Watching the videos was excruciating. Seeing Becky intimately involved with Don, Kenny, and Roger, the people he had considered his closest friends, left him shattered. The betrayal was more profound than he could have imagined, fueling his heartbreak and rage. At least now, he knew the full extent of the betrayal. The next morning, Dave arrived at his office early and began creating multiple copies of the damning footage. He burned it onto CDs, carefully labeling each one. He sent copies to each of his friends' wives and gave another to Sally for safekeeping. He placed the original in a safe deposit box, ensuring it would remain secure. But Dave didn't stop there. He uploaded the footage to several amateur adult websites, using the real names of all the participants. He set up a pay-per-view system for the video, directing the proceeds to an offshore bank account. For added irony, Dave used Don's office computer to set up the accounts, ensuring that any trace of the uploads would lead straight back to him. He also emailed select stills from the footage to Becky's friends and family, ensuring word spread quickly. To remain untraceable, he used public computers at the local college library. Dave's familiarity with the college's lax security worked to his advantage. He knew that students often left their accounts logged in, allowing him to use them undetected. Additionally, the lack of surveillance cameras made it nearly impossible to track his activities. By Wednesday, the consequences of Dave's actions began to unfold. Calls poured in from shocked and outraged individuals who had seen the video. Dave answered each one with grim satisfaction, relishing the disruption. That evening, Becky finally called, her voice trembling with anger and tears. "How could you do this, Dave?" she cried. "I thought you loved me. I told you it was just Zex, something you couldn't give me. How could you destroy my life like this?" Dave's laugh was cold. "Becky, I didn't destroy your life. You did. I warned you that there would be consequences, and now you're living them. Honestly, I'm sure you've been cheating on me for years. All those little things I ignored make sense now. This is just the beginning. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd never crossed me." Later that night, Dave's sister called, her voice dripping with sarcasm and venom. Well, well," she said with a laugh. "It looks like you finally figured out what your perfect wife has been up to. Let me guess. You're the one behind that video? Bravo! Now I think Becky and I can share the boys. I didn't even know she was screwing them until I got this." Her laughter sent chills down Dave's spine before she hung up abruptly. The night grew darker when Don called. His voice was a furious roar. "You're a goddamn fool, Dave," he shouted. "You'll regret this. I'll take everything from you, your money, your business, your family. I've been screwing Becky since high school, and I'll keep doing it long after you're gone. By the time I'm done, you'll be penniless and forgotten." Dave listened silently, letting Don vent. The entire call was recorded by the office phone system, a system Don himself had recommended, complete with a recorded warning that all calls were monitored for legal purposes. In his rage, Don either forgot or ignored it. Becky's parents also called, their tone far more subdued. Her mother was in tears. "Dave, how could you do this to Becky?" she pleaded. "I know she's hurt you, but airing this so publicly is too cruel. Couldn't you have handled it more privately?" Dave remained calm, knowing he had only just begun. Every move he made was calculated, and the fallout was unfolding exactly as he intended. By the end of the day, Dave felt a grim sense of vindication. His office's phone system had recorded every call, including Don's threatening tirades. Dave knew this evidence would be crucial in the battles that lay ahead. The most damning piece of evidence, however, came from Tad's footage. While the private investigators Sally hired managed to uncover a few incriminating phone calls, most of their findings were circumstantial and wouldn't hold up in court. Tad's recordings, however, were irrefutable. Sally wasted no time filing a complaint against Don with the state bar. His unethical behavior and explicit threats resulted in the immediate suspension of his law license, and shortly thereafter, he was permanently disbarred. The divorce proceedings were swift and ruthless. Becky's case fell apart under the weight of the evidence presented against her. In the end, she was awarded only 25% of the couple's assets, while Dave retained full control of his business. Custody of their children went to Dave, thanks in part to a devastating photo introduced during the trial. The photograph, captured inadvertently by Tad's friend, showed more than just the explicit acts taking place in Becky's living room. In the background, through the glass patio door, Dave's 8-year-old daughter could be seen, her wide, horrified eyes locked on the scene unfolding inside. The image spoke volumes, cementing Becky's reckless disregard for her children's well-being. The judge didn't hesitate to award Dave full custody, citing Becky's irresponsibility and moral failings as critical factors. Dave didn't stop there. He pursued civil lawsuits against Don for breaching attorney-client privilege and for representing Becky while maintaining a romantic relationship with her. After months of legal wrangling, the court awarded Dave $1.3 million in damages. Don's actions had not only ruined his professional reputation, but also opened him up to significant legal and financial penalties. Don's disgrace didn't end with the lawsuit. His ex-wife Shelley seized the opportunity to finalize her divorce, securing nearly all their marital assets. By the time Dave's case and Shelley's divorce were resolved, Don was left financially ruined and socially ostracized. Kenny's downfall followed a similar path. His wife Pam filed for divorce, citing infidelity and moral corruption. The settlement left Kenny with little more than his pride, his reputation in shambles. Roger, surprisingly, managed to avoid an immediate divorce. His wife, Trixie, had not only been aware of his actions, but had actively participated in the escapades with Don and Kenny. For a time, the unconventional arrangement seemed stable. However, the dynamics quickly unraveled. Don and Kenny, left without homes after their divorces, moved in with Roger and Trixie. What began as a temporary solution turned into a disaster. Don and Kenny monopolized Trixie's attention, often engaging in their escapades while Roger was excluded. Tensions grew and resentment simmered. One evening, Roger's frustration boiled over. In a fit of rage, he attacked Don and Kenny, leading to a violent altercation. Outnumbered, Roger was severely knocked and hospitalized. Criminal charges were filed, and Don and Kenny were convicted of aggravated attack, each receiving a 1-year prison sentence. Following the incident, Trixie filed for divorce, ending their volatile marriage. Nearly a year after the chaos, Dave sat in his office, poring over paperwork. Across from him, Gertrude skimmed a news article detailing the latest scandal involving Don, Kenny, and Roger. Their lives had devolved into one public disgrace after another, with the brawl over Trixie being just one of many sordid episodes. "Dave," Gertrude asked cautiously, setting the article down, "have you talked to Becky since all this ended? I know she has supervised visitation with the kids." Dave leaned back, exhaling deeply. "Only when absolutely necessary," he said. "And even then, it's strictly about the kids. If I could avoid her completely, I would." Gertrude nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I get it. It's just, for so long, it seemed like you two were unbreakable. Do you ever wonder why she did it? How does someone destroy their own family like that?" Dave was silent for a long moment, his jaw tightening. Finally, he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a worn folder. He slid it across the desk to Gertrude. "I don't know why I kept this," he admitted, "and I don't know why I read it. About 7 months ago, Becky's mom came to my office crying. She handed me this letter and begged me to read it, so I did." Gertrude unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. It was unmistakably Becky's, and the raw emotion in the words was palpable.
"Dear David, I know I've lost the right to call you mine, but you'll always be the man I love. Even though I know there's no way back for us, I have to lay bare my heart. I never set out to hurt you. I never meant to betray you, but I did, and I know you'll never forgive me. You knew about my past with Don, Kenny, and Roger from our high school days, just like I knew about yours with their girlfriends. Back then, none of it seemed to matter. But the first time I was unfaithful after we got married, it was different. It happened the weekend of Don and Shelley's Valentine's Day party, our 9th anniversary. You were swamped with a major case and couldn't attend. I felt lonely and drank too much. That's not an excuse, just the truth. Don offered to drive me home, and Kenny followed in another car to give him a ride back. During the drive, Don brought up old memories from high school, the times he and Kenny had been with me. It awakened something I couldn't ignore. By the time we got to the house, they insisted on helping me inside. I tried to resist, but not hard enough. That night, I crossed a line I can never uncross. We slept together for nearly an hour, and I felt things I hadn't in years. It became a pattern after that. Every time you were away, they'd come over. Sometimes Don and Kenny, sometimes Don and Roger, and occasionally all three. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. At some point, Don suggested I confess everything to you and ask for your blessing. He convinced me you loved me enough to accept it. He said you'd never risk a divorce, not with the kids and the business at stake. I believed him. I'm so sorry, David. I was weak. I let myself become dependent on the thrill and the pleasure. I hope someday you can forgive me. Yours always, Becky.
Gertrude placed the letter on the desk, her hands trembling. She blinked back tears as she looked at Dave. She really did love you, Dave, she said softly. But I also think Don preyed on her weaknesses. A real friend wouldn't have done this to either of you. He manipulated her. Dave nodded, his expression grim. I've thought the same thing, but I also think Becky left a lot out of that letter. Even before this mess, she was always too close to Don. It caused fights between us more than once. He hesitated, his voice tightening. After everything, I had a DNA test done on the kids. The relief I felt when I saw the results, you can't imagine. His shoulders sagged as he sighed, his tone softening. I think Becky convinced herself she loved me, but it wasn't the kind of love that really matters. I was a good provider, a stable father, an easy option. But in the end, she was selfish. She cared more about her desires than anything else. That's why she cheated. And that's why she didn't stop. Gertrude reached across the desk and placed her hand gently on his. You'll find someone who truly loves you, Dave. Someone who deserves the man you are. Dave smiled faintly, though his eyes remained distant. Maybe. But for now, I'm not looking for that. Right now, I just want peace. Years drifted by like the quiet current of the river, carrying with them the anguish, betrayal, and chaos that had once consumed Dave's life. The scars of the past remained etched into his memory, but they had dulled with time, becoming reminders of lessons learned rather than open wounds. Life had moved forward, not in a straight line, but in a series of steps, sometimes hesitant, sometimes bold, towards something resembling peace. The kids, Sean and Maddie, had been his compass during the storm. Despite their young age during the upheaval, they'd shown remarkable resilience. Sean, once shy and uncertain, grew into a confident and thoughtful young man, his father's steady guidance shaping his sense of responsibility and kindness. Maddie, whose wide eyes had once glimpsed a scene no child should witness, blossomed into an artist with a deep capacity for empathy, channeling her emotions into vivid paintings that often took Dave's breath away. Dave had poured himself into fatherhood, becoming both the nurturer and the disciplinarian, the confidant and the cheerleader. Their small family found strength in routine and tradition, Sunday night movie marathons, camping trips in the summer, and quiet mornings baking pancakes in the kitchen. Each shared laugh and small victory mended the fractures left behind by Becky's choices. Becky's presence remained, but only on the periphery. Her court-mandated supervised visits with the children were infrequent and often strained. She seemed a shadow of the woman she once was, her fiery confidence replaced by a quiet unease, her defiance tempered by the weight of her own mistakes. While Dave maintained a polite but distant relationship with her for the children's sake, he no longer felt anger when he saw her. Instead, there was pity, a recognition of how her decisions had trapped her in a cycle of regret. Dave's business, too, became a testament to his resilience. After narrowly avoiding collapse during the legal battles, he worked tirelessly to rebuild it into a thriving enterprise. His employees, many of whom had stood by him during the darkest days, became like a second family. Together, they celebrated milestones and weathered challenges, forging a workplace culture rooted in loyalty and mutual respect. Amid the chaos of rebuilding his life, Dave hadn't expected to find love again. The idea seemed impossible, too risky, too fraught with the potential for more pain. And yet, life had its own plans. Amelia came into his life not as a whirlwind, but as a steady breeze, gentle and unassuming. They met at a community fundraiser for the local library, where she was volunteering as an organizer. Her easy laugh and genuine curiosity about his life drew him in, and soon, casual conversations over coffee turned into long walks and heartfelt confessions. Amelia was different from Becky in every way. Where Becky had been fiery and impulsive, Amelia was thoughtful and patient. She listened without judgment, offering insights that were both gentle and profound. For months, Dave hesitated to let her into his heart, fearing the vulnerability that love demanded. But Amelia's quiet persistence and unwavering kindness gradually melted his defenses. She wasn't just someone to fill the void. She was a partner, a confidant, and a source of light in a life that had once been shrouded in darkness. The children adored Amelia. Maddie often spent hours with her in the garden, learning about plants and sketching flowers for her art projects. Sean, now a teenager, found in Amelia a steady source of advice and encouragement as he navigated the complexities of high school. For the first time since the divorce, their family felt whole, not in the way it once had been, but in a way that was stronger and more authentic. The years brought new challenges, as life always does. Sean's decision to pursue college out of state was bittersweet for Dave, who had grown accustomed to their close-knit routines. Maddie's struggles with anxiety tested his patience and empathy, but he tackled each moment with the determination of a father who had seen what was at stake. Through it all, Amelia stood by his side, her presence a constant reminder that even the most broken hearts could heal. One evening, years after the initial storm had passed, Dave found himself back by the river. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the water. This had been his sanctuary during the hardest times, a place where he could think, rage, or simply exist. Now it felt like a monument to how far he had come. He closed his eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over him, and allowed himself a moment of gratitude. The house he returned to was no longer a reminder of betrayal. It was a home filled with laughter and warmth. Amelia and Maddie were in the kitchen, experimenting with a new recipe, their voices mingling in easy conversation. Sean was visiting for the weekend, sprawled on the couch with a book, his presence grounding the house in a way only he could. As Dave stepped inside, Amelia looked up and smiled, her expression one of quiet joy. She walked over and wrapped her arms around him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Long day?" she asked softly. "Not anymore," he replied, his voice filled with a contentment he never thought he'd feel again. Later that night, as the family gathered around the dining table, the air was filled with stories and laughter. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer defined them. Instead, it had become a thread in the fabric of their lives, a reminder of what they had endured and the strength they had found in each other. In that moment, Dave realized that while life had taken him through storms he never anticipated, it had also brought him to a place of peace and fulfillment. He had lost much, but he had gained something greater, a deeper understanding of love, resilience, and the beauty of new beginnings. As he raised his glass in a quiet toast, he didn't speak, but his heart whispered a simple truth. The past was behind him, and the future was his to write.